Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ModelOps 2022 Summit. My name is Catherine King, and I am the Head of Digital Content and Community here at Crinium. And it is a pleasure to have you joining us today. Now, before we jump into today's sessions, I'd like to quickly draw your attention to a few items of housekeeping. Please remember that throughout the entire event, you can submit your questions to our speakers using the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen, but also the Q&A button at the bottom of the app as well. And please do remember to use that chat to share your thoughts on the content and interact with your fellow attendees as well. For any technical issues, should you experience any, which we hope you won't, please do first try refreshing your browser. If that doesn't quite do the trick, please do head over to your help desk under the account. Now, with all of that said and done, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the first speaker of today. I'm delighted to welcome to the virtual stage Farhan Chowdhury, who's the Principal Analyst for AI and Machine Learning from Gartner, who will be discussing the state of ModelOps. Farhan, I would love you to pop your camera on and take it away.
Good morning and welcome to the ModelOps Summit. My name is Farhan Chowdhury and I am an analyst with the Gartner's Artificial Intelligence team. Today, we are going to talk about the state of ModelOps. Through 2023, at least 50% of IT leaders will struggle to move their AI predictive projects from proof of concept to production maturity. Let's take a look why. Operationalization has been challenging since ages. Now there is good news and bad news. We conducted the AI and Organization survey back in 2020 and once again in 2021. And we found out that an average organization takes about 9 months to take their models from ideation to production. Now that was back in 2020. In 2021, we did a little better. We could shrink that time by about 2 months, and now it takes about an average of 7 months. But is that too much? Is that too less? Is always in the question. We speak with highly mature AI organizations that are able to take their AI models from ideation to production in about 6 to 8 weeks. But still, there are other less mature AI organizations that take about 10 to 12 months and sometimes even more than that to take their models into production. Now that's too much. The primary reason why that happens is because some of these organizations get overly fixated on the idea of machine learning model development. But here's the thing. Creating a model is the easiest part of the job. Now let's take a look at one of my favorite papers that came out of Google back in 2014. It's called The Hidden Technical Debt in Machine Learning Systems. The machine learning code, as you'd see, is at the heart of a real-world machine learning production system. But that box often represents only 5% or less of the overall code of that total production system. Now let me repeat. This box of that machine learning code often represents only 5% or less of the overall code of the total machine learning production system. Notice that a machine learning production system devotes considerable resources to input data, collecting data, verifying data, extracting features from data, and furthermore, notice that serving infrastructure must be in place to put the machine learning model's prediction into practical, real use in the world. And by now, we haven't really talked about configuration. We haven't talked about process management. We haven't talked about resource management, people management. We haven't talked about monitoring and governance, which is to say that developing the machine learning model is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about MLOps and ModelOps. And first, I'll take a few minutes to talk about what MLOps is. You'd see our popular framework here. This is the Gartner's MLOps framework. And this process the process and framework required to operationalize the machine learning pipeline is referred to as the machine learning operationalization, or MLOps. MLOps aims to standardize the development and management of machine learning models alongside the operationalization of the machine learning pipeline. It helps support the release, activation, monitoring, performance tracking, management, reuse, maintenance, and governance of machine learning artifacts. The MLOps process supports the CI/CD framework, and it derives its core principles from the best practices of DevOps. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about what ModelOps is. Model operationalization, or ModelOps, is primarily focused on the end-to-end governance and lifecycle management of all analytics, AI, and decision models. Now this includes analytical models and models based on machine learning. It includes knowledge graphs. It includes rule-based systems. It includes optimization engines. It includes linguistic models. It includes heuristic models, agent-based models, and many, many others. So to put things in perspective, MLOps today focuses on the machine learning, monitoring, and governance. It has to go to end-to-end ML operationalization support and beyond, and we are getting there. But the future is ModelOps, the end-to-end AI operationalization support and beyond. There are many models in the enterprise, and we conducted the survey, the AI and organization survey, and we found out that even though machine learning is the most popular AI technique, it's not the only one. And the only way you can prepare for it is through ModelOps. So let's talk about the nuances of ModelOps. ModelOps, or the AI model operationalization or model operationalization, primarily focuses on the governance and lifecycle management of not just machine learning, but all AI and decision models that include knowledge graphs, rules, optimization, linguistics, agent-based models, and so forth. It further focuses on AI decision models that are a part of an AI-based system. The core capabilities expected of a ModelOps solution are in principle very similar to MLOps in the kind of support for management of AI models with a repository, or supporting champion challenging deployment, model rollout, model rollback, the CI/CD integration across development and production environments. But the biggest differentiation, and here's the key takeaway, the biggest differentiation is that it provides business domain experts the autonomy to interpret outcomes and validate KPIs of AI models in production. It also provides the ability to promote or demote AI models for inferencing without full dependency on data scientists or DevOps engineers. ModelOps can help companies facing increasing challenges with scaling their analytics and AI initiatives that leverage a combination of statistical and machine learning models from lab environments into production. Now it can do so by providing regular updates and deployments as AI models are being managed, monitored, retrained, and transitioned through various environments. ModelOps has the potential to help companies maximize and scale AI initiatives by providing the level of autonomy and transparency across business, across development, across the operations teams. ModelOps can help provide a centralized way to store and secure analytical and data science assets, thus making it easier for business experts and analysts and data scientists to collaborate It allows assets to be reused or exchange models as needed. ModelOps helps support the governance protocols and ensures adherence to all internal and external standards. It can help ensure adherence to procedures as well, security requirements, ethics, and regulations, which are becoming more and more prevalent. Hence, ModelOps platforms, they should not only be able to support all of this, but help support automated versioning, fine-grained traceable model scoring, and change management capabilities. These can be leveraged to closely test, monitor, and audit analytical asset life cycles from a technical and a business performance perspective. ModelOps is supposed to unite all of these audiences. With that said, let's take a look at what's happening in the data science and machine learning space. And for that, I'll bring up the hype cycle for data science and machine learning. Now, if we take a look here, MLOps is almost at the peak of inflated expectations, while ModelOps, composite AI, composable data and analytics, AI, trust, risk, and security management are at the innovation trigger. Now, here's some news for you. We expect a lot of these innovations to swift their way across the hype cycle very soon. They are not going to spend a lot of time in the trough of disillusionment. However, they are going to move into the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity really soon. That's how fast-paced the data science and machine learning space is. But let's narrow it down. Let's take a look at a traditional machine learning workflow, just for the sake of argument. And there are so many challenges that organizations tend to encounter. There are critical touch points and issues across the workflow. If we look at business requirements and goal definition, there could be a lack of understanding of AI benefits and uses. There could be lack of skills or staff. The organizations might find it difficult or hard to measure the business value generated out of these models. Or what do they expect out of these models once they are deployed into production? On the data side, there could be challenges with data collection, data processing, data analysis, just because of the sheer volume or complexity of the data or the data quality in itself. Data accessibility could also be a huge challenge. Moving on to machine learning development, machine learning or model development or model evaluation, there could be lack of technology knowledge. There could be the lack of capability to leverage diverse AI techniques. Again, machine learning is just one of the AI techniques that organizations use. There are many more AI techniques that they use. Or there could be very little improvement over existing technologies. And then we talk about the model deployment and inferencing and the monitoring and integration of these models in production. There could be a lack of formal operationalization methodology, something that we encounter day in and day out. There could be communication gaps, friction between internal teams. And on the adoption side, there could be a lack of business stakeholder involvement. Business stakeholder involvement is absolutely pivotal to a healthy ModelOps strategy. There could be inconsistent provisioning of models. There could be a failure on the business side to track and monitor models in production and to really see the value that they are generating for the business. And we are barely scratching the surface. There are going to be security and ethical concerns. There are going to be potential risks and liabilities. And there is going to be a complexity of integration with existing infrastructure across the workflow. We need to unite all of this. Having talked about that, there is now a clear need for ModelOps. And there are multiple conversations that are driving ModelOps. First and foremost being the single source of truth. Organizations want to have that single view of the models that are running in production, multiple data points associated with it. They want to see what's happening where, who is doing what. They want to manage the people, the process, the technology, all from one pane. There are conversations, and since this is becoming more on the single source of truth side, it's becoming mostly business driven. It's barely data science and machine learning driven. It's not just that an isolated tiny data science and machine learning team that is sitting in the business unit is driving these conversations. These conversations are driven by the enterprise. They want to have that visibility across geographies, across business units, across different platforms, and see how can it all be woven into a single source of truth. Organizations have realized that there is no silver bullet out there. Composability is the way to go. Having a best-in-class end-to-end one single monolithic solution is not going to work, but you can still have a best-in-class solution for each of your verticals, for your data ops, for your model ops, for your DevOps, for your security, for your orchestration. Composability is essentially driving all of these conversations around model ops. AI trust, risk, and security management. Model ops is a core capability for risk management. Now, there are tremendous talent constraints. Organizations have also realized that data scientists or DevOps engineers are too expensive of a resource to be spending time on model risk management, for instance, on model operationalization, on model validation, which is why we are having conversations around having specialized groups, model validation groups, model risk management groups, model review committees that are responsible for sustaining these models into production. And last but not the least, we have also encountered that organizations tend to face exponential model growth. If you have more number of models in production, that just means that you will be able to make more of your POCs reach into production. So we have seen organizations go from 10 models to 20 to 30 models to 50 to 70 models, then 100, then thousands, and then hundreds of thousands of models. So in order for organizations to manage an exponential model growth, which is going to happen, and you want it to happen, you need a centralized model ops strategy. Now, we have talked about AI trust, risk, and security management, but let me give you a quick definition on it. It comprises of multiple software segments, and all of these ensure AI model governance, trustworthiness, fairness, reliability, efficacy, security, data protection, among many others. And these tools include solution for model interpretability and explainability. They include solution for data protection, for model operations, which is model ops, data anomaly detection, adversarial attack resistance, and together, the use of these solutions from all of these categories will help enterprises implement AI-specific trust, risk, and security management measures. But let's dig in deeper. Let's look at the state of the TRISM market space. Now, we expect this market to quickly evolve, driven in part by increasing regulations and by increased capabilities to operationalize AI models. New generations of combined functionality will emerge over time. And we expect the AI TRISM market to arrive at phase 5 by 2026. And the progression here will look something like this. Phase 1, you can take a look. There's explainability, there's model ops, there is adversarial resistance, data protection, data anomaly detection. The AI TRISM market is highly fragmented. AI vendors, any of them, do not provide all the requisite functionality to effectively and continuously manage AI trust, risk, and security. Now, this leaves end users in a spot where they select more than one provider for the best of breed products from the primary AI TRISM categories to fulfill these requirements. And these requirements are going to vary by industry. In phase 2, we are going to look at feature consolidation, and this is where things start to become more interesting. The AI TRISM capabilities will be consolidated into just 2 buckets, down from the current 5 that were in phase 1. Model ops and data protection will be the primary 2 vendor categories required to address AI TRISM issues. At the same time, AI vendors will expand their own TRISM functionality. In phase 3, we are going to look at solution integration. Model ops alerts and remediations will be integrated into an overarching and existing enterprise risk management and security orchestration system. I'll emphasize on this one more time. It's going to be integrated into an overarching and existing enterprise risk management and security orchestration system. Third-party models used by the enterprise will be incorporated into ModelOps platform management beyond first-party enterprise developed models. Alerts and remediations for adversarial attacks and malicious transactions will be integrated into security orchestrations or SIEM systems. In phase 4, we'll have some kind of a market consolidation here. Most of the model and platform neutral, platform agnostic ModelOps vendors in the market today will be acquired by broader AI platform vendors or enterprise risk management vendors, leaving a very few pure play ModelOps vendors. These consolidated platforms will coexist with innovative solutions that extend capabilities to composite AI and generative AI, and we'll get to that in a minute. Data protection for AI model data will continue to evolve from solutions used to protect data outside of AI applications. And in phase 5, we are going to look at the augmented AI managed TRISM, a new end-to-end fully managed AI TRISM system that will themselves use AI to be self-correcting under human oversight. So it will be augmented, it will be automated, and we are going to move into phase 5 in the next 5 years or so. With that said, I'd like to share some survey data points with you, and the very first one that I'd like to start with is here. 1 in 10 organizations can get 75% or more of their POCs into production, which is to say that 54% is the average proportion of projects that make it into pilot to production. Now, we have been running this survey, the AI in Organization survey, for many years. And I'll share with you, back in 2018 when we ran the numbers, we were sitting at 50%. In 2020, we were still somewhere between the 50-55% mark, and we are still there. There has not been a lot of improvement in the past 4 years. We are still not very good at productionizing our models. The ability to get POCs into production is higher when there is an AI team, and AI initiatives are measured formally and continuously. Now, this is important. There has to be a formal structure in place, and organizations need to measure, continuously and formally measure the impact of their AI initiatives. And if you're doing that, the chances of you making more of your POCs make it into production is going to rise. The more models deployed, the higher proportion of POCs make it into production. So if you're succeeding at model deployment right now, it is just to say that a higher number of your POCs are going to make it into production. And we are seeing this. There are organizations that have dozens of models, hundreds of models, but even hundreds and hundreds of thousands of models. We are seeing that small and mid-sized enterprises, small and medium businesses are struggling more than larger company sizes to take their POCs into production. And there could be plenty of reasons why. There could be a lack of formal structure, there could be a lack of talent, there could be a lack of standardization, a lack of automation, the lack of complexity of tools, there could be data challenges, there could be model development challenges, there could be so many challenges that SMBs could be encountering that larger global enterprises might not be. But that's one more reason why ModelOps is the answer. A centralized strategy in place is going to ensure that more number of your models make it into production. There are organizations that indicate that have thousands and hundreds of thousands of models deployed. And this is more of a wake-up call. There are organizations that are really doing it very, very well. There are dozens of organizations. There are hundreds of there are organizations. 40% of the organizations have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of models running in production, and the way they are able to manage it is through centralization, having that visibility into the models that are running in production. And here's some good news. Organizations have now realized that they need to upskill more for AI operationalization than for model development. I used to have so many conversations back in the day around best practices on AI model development. How do I make sure that my model is best in class? How do I have the best in class R squared or RMSE or the F1s? That conversation has now shifted to how do I look at people and process and technology? How do I prepare myself for not just operationalization, but also sustaining these models in production? How do I ensure that I'm always prepared, that I'm always on my front foot? So organizations have now realized that they have to be prepared, and now they are upskilling more for AI operationalization than they are doing for model development. 40% of organizations have had an AI privacy breach or security incident, and of those, 1 in 4 were malicious attacks. And you would remember earlier during the presentation, I talked about the nuances in ModelOps. ModelOps does address some of the privacy and security considerations too. Majority of the organizations document the explainability of AI models, and it is more so for asset-centric industries. Again, I'll go back to the nuances of ModelOps and highlight it once more as a key takeaway, that the deployment, the explainability, the monitoring, the integration, the compliance and auditability, the security and privacy for all kinds of AI models is absolutely critical for a ModelOps strategy. With that in mind, let's talk about AI engineering. ModelOps is the first step towards AI engineering. And here's the key takeaway. By 2024, 70% of organizations relying solely on machine learning for their AI initiatives will spend more money per model than those leveraging composite AI techniques. And we'll get to composite AI in a second. As I said earlier during my presentation, machine learning is the most popular AI technique. There are no two ways about it. But it's not the only one. Organizations do also tend to use graph models, linguistic models, heuristic models, agent-based systems as a means to enhance their AI initiatives. And if organizations tend to overly rely just on machine learning for their AI initiatives, they will be spending more money per model than those leveraging composite AI techniques, the connectionist approach technique for model model value delivery. Now let's take a look at what this evolution looks like. Now, AI engineering streamlines the AI development lifecycle. Now this includes data ops, model ops, DevOps, and it ensures an uninterrupted transition for AI models across operational and maintenance environments. AI engineering practices do overcome user and operator fatigue and skepticism by improving the ability to move AI projects beyond prototypes in production. And this is done so by enabling seamless, consistent, and targeted maintenance of models. These improvements to AI production reposition, it is as transformative and differentiating as a technology as it can get. Therefore, consideration of responsible AI, risk, trust, transparency, ethics, credibility, accountability, governance, these are primary design considerations for AI engineering. And the first step towards it is ModelOps. We want to move from MLOps to ModelOps, and ModelOps in here is the discipline which is once again focused primarily on the governance and lifecycle management of a wide range of operationalized AI and decision models, which includes machine learning models. AI engineering methods also enable the governance and procedures aimed at providing an uninterrupted flow between development, operationalization, and full maintenance of AI models. Composite AI, let's talk about that. It also deals with the combination of AI techniques. Organizations are combining different AI techniques to improve the efficiency of their learning, the efficacy of learning, to broaden the level of knowledge representation, and to ultimately solve a wider range of business problems in a more efficient manner. But before we get to a connectionist approach, we do need to operationalize a wider range of AI models. Only when a wider range of AI models have been operationalized is when we'll be able to combine these different AI techniques to improve the efficiency of learning and broaden the knowledge representation and ultimately solve a wider range of business problems in a more efficient manner. And finally, we are able to move from ModelOps to composite AI to generative AI to create more adaptive systems. Now, let me explain what we mean by generative AI. Now, as AI techniques do not just solve problems, but can create and generate solutions, generative AI techniques are also coming under the purview of the AI engineering discipline, which would be managing machine innovation, software agents, building autonomy, creating design assistants, generative adversarial networks, transformer models, creative AI. All of that is starting to come under the purview of AI engineering while taking care of security, ethics, autonomy, decisioning. And as we move ahead, as there are advancements in technology, as the operational steps become more and more complicated, we have to create systems that are more adaptive in nature. That's the end goal of AI engineering. And all of that starts with ModelOps. So here are our recommendations. Minimize the technical debt of deployed machine learning models by monitoring and revalidating their business value, and by adopting a foundational ModelOps practice, which is the first stage of an AI engineering discipline. Ensure the integrity, transparency, and sustainability of AI models through a systematic process, and enduring governance principles based on fairness, trustworthiness, reliability, and accountability. Identify projects in which a fully data-driven machine learning only approach is unviable and inefficient, while exploring the expressive power of composite AI to solve complex business problems. And last but not the least, extend the skills of AI experts to cover multiple AI techniques, both from a model development and operationalization perspective. With that, I'd like to thank you today for joining in on my presentation, and we'll now open for some Q&A.
Wow, what a brilliant masterclass there from Farhan. And thank you to everyone sending in questions. So Farhan, if you'd like to come back off of, pop your camera on if you're able to, I'd love to ask you some of these questions that we've had come in. One of the first questions being, is this available on demand? Yes, it is. It will be available, so you can watch it back, because I know I was furiously writing notes as well, and it's always good to be able to revisit those. But one of the first questions came in from Brian, and Brian says, getting a model into production is not the end of the process, and the governance over those models needs to be implemented as part of the process. Then it needs to be monitored and likely retrained. So my question is, do these statistics for getting a model into production include designing and implementing the model lifecycle? What a fantastic question. Thank you, Brian. Farhan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This is quite an interesting observation, and let's start with what Brian says at the beginning. Operationalizing the model, again, is one of the first steps. That's one of the early steps that you'll take to generate business value out of the models that you're putting in production, or the money that you've invested in your model lifecycle process. So yes, those numbers do include designing, implementing the model lifecycle, but operationalizing the model is not the last step. Monitoring, governance are often those items that end users tend to think about maybe on day 3 or day 4. And by then, it becomes too late. We have to think of the governance of these artifacts on day -1, not even on day 0, on day -1. That's how important it is.
I love that. I love the passion of that. So the next question that came in, I'm trying to do this in order, just for fairness. So I'm trying to be careful here, Farhad. So the next question was optimizing RMSE and map, etc., was always a slightly misplaced goal. Sometimes ignores diminishing returns of lower error. And should the goal not be to optimize business outcomes?
Interesting once again, and thank you for raising this point. Yes, optimizing the RMSEs and the F1s and all of these accuracy metrics is a misplaced goal. The end goal here is to optimize business outcomes. It is to generate value for the business. That's the end goal here. I can operationalize as many models as I want if they are not impacting a current business process or a customer-facing application. It's not generating value for me. So the end goal here definitely is not to have more accurate. I mean, you should have accurate models. That's the objective. But we should not overly fixate on exercises where we are spending hours and hours of our precious time on improving the accuracy, wherein we can just productionize a good enough model and start getting the value for the business. And I think over here I'd like to say something. I think some organizations try to have these perfect models running in production, and I just say that perfect is the enemy of good. If there are good enough models, you can operationalize them, and in iterations keep on improving on them. It's an iterative process.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just trying to keep up with the chat here, that is something that Stu adds in as well into the conversation here, saying that it is allowing data scientists to quickly iterate exactly that. Now, we did have another question come in via the Q&A option. Ramdev, thank you so much for sending it in. And Ramdev asked, does MLOps/ModelOps imply automation through the complete lifecycle or only at certain stages?
Thank you so much for that question. Currently, as we can see the space of MLOps and ModelOps evolving, I've been having a lot of conversations around standardization of the process, because organizations are still trying to get their heads around, hey, I have these many models. What would be the best possible route to take to productionize these models? Now, that's on standardization. But with that said, there are mature AI organizations or organizations that are moving towards maturity that are aiming at automation, at augmentation. We are not talking about an end-to-end fully automated ModelOps solutioning. We are not talking about 100% automation here. If we look at it from a process standpoint, and for each process, we look at the sub-process and the subtasks that are associated with these sub-processes, parts of these sub-processes and subtasks can be automated. It depends, once again, the industry that you're in, the domain that you're in, the kind of model that you're creating. Do you have the appetite to automate some parts of the process? If the answer is yes, then automation is something that organizations are gravitating towards.
Amazing, thank you so much. I'm trying to look at the questions now because the clock is ticking, I'm being told in my ear here. So Srinivas says, firstly, he says wonderful presentation, so I'll pass that forward to you. But then asks, how does Gartner see the magic quadrant for composite AI? Can you please throw some light on companies in this space?
Thank you so much for that question. Currently, we don't have a magic quadrant for composite AI. As I said, and we have been talking about this since time immemorial. Machine learning, in my presentation, I told everyone it's one of the more popular AI techniques. It's not the only one. Organizations do operationalize graph models, linguistic models, heuristic models. With that diversity in operationalization, and we are still getting there, the organizations are still struggling with productionizing models. The numbers that we see from the 2018 survey, from the 2020 survey, from the 2021 survey, the numbers still hover around that 50–55% mark. And one of these findings I'll share with you once again. We ran a survey quite recently in one of the webinars that I did a couple of weeks back. And we asked the audience, and we had a huge crowd in that webinar, and we asked everyone, in an ideal world, what percentage of your models would you like to have in production in an ideal world? So we had buckets, 0 to 20%, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and 80 to 100. We did have individuals who was clearly struggling with it because they said they had just 0 to 20, but we had some very clear optimists who said that they want 80 to 100% of their models in production, but a majority of that audience said that they want 60 to 80% of their models running in production. There is going to be trial and error in the process. We have to ensure that we are able to reuse these artifacts. Again, ModelOps helps with reusability of these artifacts. We are able to reuse these artifacts, learn from them, and then operationalize better. There's always going to be waste, but we have to minimize the way we use it.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time kind of coming back to you on this one because I need to get through these questions. 3 minutes left on the clock. So Philip has written in, thank you, Philip, and asks, what is your view of how MLOps can support models on the edge devices and device-related technologies such as split computing? In brackets, they're saying head model on device and tail model on server. Great question.
Great question indeed. We are seeing progress in this arena, wherein MLOps providers are supporting models that are on edge devices. But again, with ModelOps, we are talking about operationalization and execution agnosticity. So it doesn't matter whether it's the edge, whether it's on premise, whether it's hybrid cloud, it's on the cloud, you're able to do it regardless. So the objective here, either with MLOps, if you're dealing with machine learning models, or if you're dealing with decision models, analytical models, other AI models, including machine learning models, then you have to aim at that very important word, which is agnosticity. That is what gives you the edge.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm looking trying to look at all my various screens here. I think I'm still missing a moderator for the next session, so it means we can steal a few minutes from there. We'll keep going with some of these questions. So Brian has written in again and says, some use cases do focus on accuracy, often at the expense of robustness, and some have different requirements from a confusion matrix perspective. In brackets here saying false positives and false negatives are more or less acceptable. Do you see any models implemented with these parameters explicitly tunable? And if so, who is typically responsible for tuning the requirement parameters?
Excellent question, Brian. The short answer to your question is yes. We do see models being implemented where organizations want to tune in these parameters, and to put a label on it, we are seeing the likes of model author groups that are responsible. So there has to be cross-pollination between business teams, model author groups, model review groups. Everyone has to cross-pollinate, transfer the knowledge, share their insights, and then ensure that everyone is on the same page when we talk about some level of customization at any part of the process. Remember, it was a process, it had sub-processes and subtasks associated with it. Everyone needs to be informed. That's what we do.
Amazing, Farhan. Thank you so much for kicking off the event. Just the sheer amount of questions and engagement we have speaks for the quality of that session. So thank you so much for joining us. And of course, everyone, do be sure to connect with Farhan both on the platform, but on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much. Now, with that, we will be heading into our next session, which is a panel discussion all about the state of ModelOps. So just as you have been doing, get those questions in nice and early so that we have a chance to ask our panelists. But if we do run out of time, don't forget at the end of this event, we do have a Meet the Speakers session. So it is my pleasure to hand the reins over to Agus, who is the head of corporate model risk for Wells Fargo, who will be moderating in on this panel today. Agus, if you would like to pop on your video and take it away.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the time here. I have a the pleasure of moderating this session. So this session is about discussion on the on the model op. We will have a hopefully will be a lively discussion that will be useful for many of you. Let's start with the introduction first. My name is Agus Sujianto. I am the head of corporate model race for Wells Fargo. I'm responsible for the oversight of model development and model in production, which we have quite a lot in Wells Fargo. As you know, bank runs by models. So we have a couple thousand model in our system, and that's what we run day in and day out to run the bank. So with that, let's go around and start with Stu.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Agus. My name is Stu Bailey. I'm the author of ModelOps for Dummies. I'm also the co-founder of ModelOps, an enterprise vendor in this space. But I've really been focused on helping large organizations develop their ModelOps capabilities as they've, very much what Farhan just said, as they've matured in their enterprise AI journey.
All right. Thank you, Stu. Mina, you want to do next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Meena Tanikachalam. I'm head of data solutions and analytics at Ally. Ally is a leading digital financial services company. Doing it right for our customers has been the primary focus for us. My role at Ally is to spearhead technology and modernize our data platforms and also make our company more data-driven. I partner very closely with our business functions that does machine learning and modeling. Primarily also work very closely with our chief risk office function, who's responsible for doing model risk management and validation. Very excited to learn more about the perspectives from various peers of mine and also from the audience.
Thank you, Mina. Junlo?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jean-Luc Chatelain. I'm the global CTO for Accenture Applied Intelligence, aka Accenture AI. We are a group of about 25,000 people within Accenture that focuses only on three things, which is AI, advanced analytics, and automation. I've been working on the space of ModelOps since as early as 2015. I've authored a few papers on ModelOps and what at that time was going to be needed for people to operational AI at scale in their digital transformation.
Thank you, Steve.
Hello, my name is Steve Philpott. I'm the CIO and Chief Data Officer for Solidigm. Solidigm is a market leader in the NAND flash technology, a combination of Intel's heritage and SK Hynix global presence, looking to revolutionize kind of the future of data and storage. Previous to that, I was with Western Digital, where I headed up their IT CIO organization, but I also built out their digital analytics office, which was a team of data scientists, data engineers, and software developers that built out their advanced analytics capabilities.
Thank you very much. This is will be very interesting panel because people with very, very diverse background. And so the question that I will ask will be taking advantage of the diversity of the background of the panelists here. Hopefully will be a lively discussion. Before going that, let me make a little bit introduction as well. In banking, large financial institution, large banks in particular, we have a very, very mature process in terms of managing model risk, how to manage model in development and production. In particular, the practice maturing in the last 10 years since the introduction of a regulatory guidance that known as SR 11.7 by Federal Reserve or OCC 11-12. So many of you that are not from banking area that's never heard about SR 11.7, maybe you would like to read that because it's very, very insightful. And all the process in banking and large bank when they operationalize model, develop and operationalize model are really built based on the expectation from the guidance. Recently, NIST, National Institute of Standard and Technology, published also their draft on how to their risk management framework to manage risk of AI as well, operational AI. So I think it's a very, very good read. It's in the early draft. I think they are seeking for a feedback. So I would highly encourage you to read that. I was in a NIST workshop a few weeks ago, and yesterday I am in DC, part of Commerce Department with NIST, talking about the framework as well. So that's the attention in terms of how to safely use and manage AI. As you know, large bank, we always use model. We run the business using model, so we kind of accustomed in terms of operationalizing model and how to use a model for critical decision making and manage the risk. So with that, the terminology of model op are something new terminology, and people interpret it and understand it differently. For mature organization practice, we think we always have model ops, but let's see how the discussion evolve here. So with that in the background, the term of model ops or ML ops or DevOps or whatever, we get thrown away left and right. And people define it very differently, different group, different user, and define things very differently. So I would like to hear from the panelists here, if you can share your thought, a couple minutes each probably, to share your thought. What do you mean when we talk about model ops? So why don't we start with John Locke first?
Sure.
When we talk about model ops, what is in your mind? What's your definition? What's in scope, etc.?
So to me, it has always been the end-to-end from raw data all the way to what I'm called model retirement. When you decide a model is no longer useful in your business and you got to do. So it's a bit like product lifecycle management, right? You start with the idea and you ended up with a product at one point you sunset, and it's the end-to-end, literally. It's almost religious term. I love the word model ops because I'm not assuming every model is an ML model, right? Although ML is taking the domain by storm, of course, there will still be some more statistical thing. And at the end of the day, we have to think of legacy, right? A lot of legacy model in SAS or other languages are still traditional. So model ops is end-to-end. That's the way I look at it.
All right, that's very good. Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, no, great. Appreciate it. So maybe we can start with the generic version. You know, ModelOps is that enterprise capability that provides governance and operation for models in production. But maybe what I can do is just take a little bit of a different tact. And, you know, a big part of the terminology is separating the model development from the running, care, feeding of the models in production. So maybe I hit on kind of a four big level kind of areas. You know, first is ModelOps allowing us to treat the models as an enterprise asset, where ModelOps is about the visibility and the orchestration of these models at the enterprise level, you know, regardless of where they come from. And we've heard a whole bunch of different examples here of the variety of where models come from. But we treat data as an asset. We now need to treat models as an asset. And ModelOps is about building the workflow, processes, automation, you know, holding models auditable, manageable. I've heard Stu and others use the word accountable, and being able to know the model's relationship with data. The second thing that I would bring up is one of the ways we look at kind of this whole process and dividing it up into three towers. We have rapid learning cycles, rapid production cycles, and rapid scaling cycles, where the rapid learning cycle is the development and the building of the models, whereas the rapid production cycles and the rapid scaling cycles are really where the model ops aspect is. It's not focused on the model development, but it's more focused on the operationalizing of those models. And we've had a lot of use cases where we thought there was great models, but the challenges were, was it feasible to get it into production? Was it feasible then to scale it? And we spend a lot of money on enterprise AI, and how do we have that process set up so that we know how to get the value out of our AI investment? And we heard earlier, Farhan talked about, where do models fail? It's the operationalization of these models. That rapid production cycle, that rapid learning cycle is where a lot of these fail. The third kind of aspect of this is kind of from the freedom of innovation. Having, we talked about the lack of data scientists out there. So we want to make sure the data scientists are focused on the rapid learning cycles. They're focused on the innovation side. But at the same time, while we're allowing that freedom of innovation, we still need a consistent way to operate and manage these in a 7x24 environment, which helps democratize the building of models to subject matter experts throughout the organization. And then maybe the last point I will talk about is kind of the future proofing that comes through decoupling. Again, in our model, the rapid learning cycles, rapid production and rapid scaling cycles, being able to decouple those two parts such that if we make changes on one side of the fence, it doesn't impact us having to drive changes on the other side of the fence. And again, going in either direction. But that allows us to be more agile. That allows us to get a kind of quicker development cycle. And the other thing about this is, again, going back to the data scientist, is freeing them up so they don't have to worry about any of the operational production cycles. And again, I know as we're going through these conversations, there's going to be a whole lot of differences and discussions about how we approach model ops, but there's a couple kind of initial comments to get us going.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Mina?
Yeah, so I learned a lot of great facts from Jean and from Steve. So I would touch upon perspectives in terms of where ModelOps can enable the right outcome for the business. Primarily, we see in many organizations, data is scattered across different technologies and different platforms. Models are built in different technologies and different tools are used on-prem or on the cloud, and many organizations are in the journey towards migrating data to cloud. So I see ModelOps as a discipline that helps accelerate the end-to-end process in terms of migrating the models from the lab to the production, also enabling the orchestration and workflow automation of the end-to-end process, and also eliminating any dependencies across teams. Primarily enables team members to collaborate in an open platform, holistically, seamlessly, eliminating any friction, connecting the data with the technology, and also making sure different groups within the organization, be it is a model development organization or the model deployment team or model risk management function or the technology partners, can all collaborate and be able to achieve the target of deploying models to production. Another key benefit or key scope of ModelOps that I have even experimented is how do we even, to Steve and Jean's point, how do we even monitor the models, the health of the models? Are there any bias that we can eliminate early on in the process of model development and deploying the models to production? Are there any drifts that we can identify? So the discipline also focuses on some of these characteristics, and also would be able to collect metrics, which was very tedious previously, collecting metrics around the model's performance. I think with this discipline of model ops, it has become much easier for organizations to accomplish the same. Another aspect I would talk about is in terms of organizational structure, like models constantly keeps growing in many organizations. And then in terms of the number of resources, each organization is constrained with a limitation. I think this discipline, if implemented properly in an organization, can help scale and mature, and also help enable the organization grow at a rapid pace compared to doing the traditional approaches that many organizations are doing today. So I think there's a lot of scope in terms of maturing the model development process, and also taking the model right from the lab to production. Plus also, I would say that there is a room for improvement in terms of overall maturity, speed to market, agility, scalability, and a variety of other benefits for any organization. So that is where the scope of model ops lies in.
Thank you, Meena. Stu, you have seen many different areas, and you've done a lot of study on this. So your thoughts, Stu?
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief. Obviously, I wrote a book on model ops, so I direct people there for the longer discussion. But really, as everyone said, and as Farhan said, model ops, from our experience, has been about the models as enterprise assets, and then practices to continuously assess impact, which includes business impact, continuously govern risk. And that's both on the front end, being able to proactively mitigate risk by validations, other things, but also on the back end in long-lived operation to be able to respond to changes and take response. And then thirdly, really drive continuous sustainable operation at scale. And that's where some of the complexity comes in. So those things have been kind of true of the model ops journey, I think, for a while now. I think the exciting trends are, just this panel, of course, kind of the recognition of the difference between some of the terminology today is markedly different than it even was a year ago. And I think that's helping people kind of be more efficient in where they're spending their resources. And model ops, as Farhan mentioned, as everyone mentioned here, is really a capability that comes into focus with some maturity in the enterprise AI capability and investment. And so it's driven by not only the number of models, but kind of the number of business units solving problems with models, as well as the different types of models. And we're seeing that that's, that market is actually happening because real investments in enterprise AI are starting to scale, and that's driving it. The other exciting thing from even a year ago is the number of industries that are reaching that maturity curve. Really financial services have been quite ahead of many other industries in terms of enterprise AI maturity. And we've just seen that now, consumer goods, manufacturing, transportation are kind of reaching that level of maturity where model ops becomes an important capability. So those are kind of a couple of the trends that we've seen.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Stu, for the insight there. I would like to follow up from the discussion that from the panelists here. When we look at model life cycle, we start with model identification. We're talking about as an asset, so we need to know all the asset that we have. Model it's an asset, but also liability, because all models are wrong, and when they're wrong, they create damage to the institution, to the user, or to the customer. So part of that, the most important aspect is, do we want to make sure we understand all the asset and all the liability? So first stage is always model identification across the company. Second, model development. We talk about the process of developing model, and then model validation. In financial institution is independent function. People independent function do model validation, act like a safety engineer to look at what can go wrong with the model, and then model implementation or deployment, and model production and monitoring, as Mina talked about. So we have all those stages in the model, and on top of that, all this life cycle need to be governed. We need to know everything, how the process are being managed, all the assets that are being managed, and all the potential risks are being managed. What have you seen in the market, as well as internally developed approach to address this component? What are the pinpoint and challenges? So I'm going to start with probably with Mina here.
Yeah, so the primary challenges that we see in any organization is primarily the complexity of the landscape, as I stated earlier. So it's highly complex because there are different groups within an organization that does model development, and maintenance of the models over a period of time becomes challenging, and also keeping track of the inventory of the models, the performance of the models, is also a nightmare in several organizations. And added to that, in terms of like operationalizing the models, there are the disconnects across teams. Who does the model development? And there is a technology organization who may be partnering in developing the infrastructure for the teams that does model development. So in order for all of these teams to collaborate and come together, it has become a challenge in many organizations, because there is not any canvas or landscape where everybody can go, what's happening? Is the model approved? Is it ready for production? Who needs to approve? What sort of sensitive elements we have? Is it secure? What would be the process to even create a pipeline, DevOps pipeline, or pipeline to even deploy the models? So it's kind of the end-to-end process, and collaboration across different teams has been challenging. Plus the growing volume and complexity of the landscape demanded a lot of like manual intervention. Primarily, the process is very manual in many organizations, even today. And it's a state that, you know, we are still thinking about how ModelOps can help and what is the scope of ModelOps. But I think it's the right time to even start thinking about incorporating the ModelOps capability in many organizations rather than debating, because you're going to lose the operational efficiency if we debate constantly. Rather, take a step, look at the capabilities available, and also successfully do a prototype and see how the rest of the organization can adopt the practices and capabilities offered. On the other hand, I would say there is lack of resources and resource constraints, which constantly becomes a challenge for bigger organizations to even constantly monitor the models, and also be on a constant lookout for any ethical issues or ethical unfairness, be it in the data, or be it is in the model, or be it is after the model gets deployed to production. So constant monitoring and manual processes that does the monitoring across different tools and technologies, be it is on-prem or on the cloud, it is challenging to have different skill set across different technologies to be monitoring the models. Rather, you know, there is not an open canvas that can do everything at the same time, giving a visibility and a broader perspective to everyone in the organization. Primarily, model risk management functions does a lot of heavy lifting in many organizations so that they can be responsible for the model health, performance, degradation, what have you. So their life, I would say, would considerably improve by incorporating the ModelOps capabilities in the respective functions. I think these are some of the challenges and bottlenecks I have seen in organizations that are heavy on building machine learning models.
Thank you. Chandler, from your consulting view, would you like to share your thought?
Sure. So, there's a lot of, life is not perfect yet in the world of ModelOps, right? I think the good news is that an increasing number of clients are sort of getting religion, right, when it comes to do the right thing. However, if we put aside the industries that are subject to regulation, like banking or healthcare, right? And I think you're way more advanced than anybody else in the term of ModelOps because the regulator helps you get there, right? So sometimes fear is a good thing. But if I look at the global 2000, excluding the domain, it is still, data science, I think I said that last year, is still a cottage industry of very good artisan doing very good result in their little world, with sometimes total ignorance of what it takes for IT to make that real into the business, right? So the steps you identified are all accurate. The awareness of the challenge of the maturity, the mental maturity needed is still very low, right? If you take, for example, model sharing, right? If you ask your average data scientist what model sharing means, he says, oh, I got GitHub and my buddy Agus here can get the model out of it, right? They don't think of the fact that this is not publishing a model, right? Publishing a model is like publishing an article in newspapers. There's an editor, that somebody's going to look at your article, that check the facts, right? So models are the same. If you are going to publish a model, you have to have a governance around the publication of that model. Did you document it? Did you show all of the training data, all of the expected result with a test training set and all that kind of stuff? So that's a place where I see today it's just GitHub, right? And a lot of myths on that stuff. We also see, and I want to give an up to some of the members of the ISV community. There are too many tools out there in the data science space, right? It's not against innovation, but what I'm saying is there's too many tools that are focused on making data scientists' life better, right? And helping them, and totally ignoring what IT needs. And I think a lot of the green space in the world of data science at scale and AI at scale is bringing the right set of tooling, monitoring, et cetera, that IT can use, because that's where it's going to fail, right? The business is going to fail their digital transformation if those models don't work, perfectly in production. And when they fail, if they are, self-healed, while in production. And that to me is a big gap still. So you've identified the step well. It's just every single step of the way, there's need of education, sometimes better tooling, right? Adoption of a discipline. ModelOps is a discipline, right? At the end of the day, it's a discipline of doing all the functions Steve mentioned before, at doing it right, to get your outcomes, to truly change your business. So it's kind of a good news for the like of a company like ModelOps and others. The market is eager for maybe less point product and more where it's an exhaustive solution, right? That can help cover that end-to-end change we talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Steve,
if I just add,
go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to add a comment to that. Kind of looking at the pain point, because coming from the perspective that I had an opportunity to do this for 8+ years at a previous company, and the pain point was it was a lot of manual, a lot of custom, a lot of stitching these together to try to get that repeatable process for our rapid production cycles and our rapid scaling cycles. And I think the opportunity now that I get to kind of look at it with a fresh start is the maturity of this market over the last several years. I mean, it's a very dynamic, changing environment, but the maturity has got to the point where I think we can replace a lot of those manual custom processes with a more composable architecture to help us be efficient in that space.
That is
Sorry, Stu, I think I cut you off.
No, go on. Stu, probably would like to hear from you. You lead a company that tried to solve this problem, right? And you wrote a book on this one. So
so again, I'll try to be brief because we can always talk a lot about it, but I just very concisely, no one talks to us unless they already have some pain. So the areas of pain that are front and center right now, it's kind of driving things are very clearly model validation and general compliance and risk processes, primarily because it's already recognized to be an enterprise concern. And there's a lot of need for automation there. And then the other is broadly in your categories like governance, with kind of to be able to assess, kind of continually to assess impact, right? So like business value impact. So those are the two areas that we see from, again, not any one industry anymore, which is quite interesting and exciting in terms of the enterprise patterns. But that's where the immediate pain points are in that kind of list of 6 that we see right now.
Thank you. I share the pain every day, right? We have 1,000 data scientists that build model and almost 300 people that do model validation independently on top of that. And then on top of that, we have model governance that govern all of this life cycle, tracking all the model, not only productionalize the model, but tracking every single one of that. So this is a massive operation for company that thinking about operationalizing very, very large number of model safely and responsibly. So it's not it's an expensive undertaking. On top of that, it's a difficult talent to get that we have today. So I think all the thing, the pinpoint that we talk about is real. If somebody want to really operationalizing model at scale like what we do. So I think thank you for sharing that. I want to a little bit to probably question a little bit to Steve, because something that related to on the model ops side is on the experience on the data management and data governance, because that is a very, very complex and hairy stuff as well. And what do you connect in there, and the connection with the model ops piece? So the people that dealing with model ops tend to model governance, data management. That is the data management side, not the model side. So how do you see this one, Steve?
So just kind of a couple quick comments. One, we talked about managing models as an asset. Data feeds models. So we need to ensure the operability and monitoring of the models also includes the monitoring and management of the underlying data, and so it's taking a look at the governance around, what data was used to train the model, what data was used to test the model, what data was used to validate the model, where are the production data sources, that holistic view of the data feeding the model. And then we also need to ensure that model ops workflow has an audible reference to that data. Where were those data sets? A data lake or other repository, a data governance tool. And I think there's a couple areas where data management is going to be critically important as the model ops environment matures. One of them is the area of data management as it supports risk management. And we might be able to talk about that a little bit more. And then also from a regulation standpoint, I mean, we've heard about the EU and their Artificial Intelligence Act and what's happening. There's an increasing importance in the data management and governance to be able to support this end-to-end life cycle that we've been talking about.
Yeah, to add to what Steve stated, so typically when we take the data life cycle, data is acquired, it's cleansed, and then it's also governed. This data catalog where data attributes are cataloged. And I think this process could also be expanded in the model life cycle. Primarily, I think there is options, possibly more research needs to be done to do an API integration and connect some of the data governance tools or suite of tools that could track the end-to-end lineage right from the source and track the lineage and also catalog the attributes that would be used as part of the model. And also to Steve's point, what are some of the critical elements, the public, the private, the confidential attributes that needs to be governed can be tagged and classified. So I think that's another way to handle governance and data management aspects when it comes to the model life cycle by itself.
Thank you. We talked about the data. I want to shift a little bit on the data is on the front end. So let me talk about the back end a little bit. So model is built, model done. So now let's put it in production. And when we talk about that, typically, at least in banking, we do model for two types. I'm trying to categorize it very broadly. One is for predictive analytics, the other for process automation. So we can apply model for either predictive analytics or for automation. Predictive analytics for us is like credit underwriting, for fraud, and all of those things that typically has already established computing infrastructure and deployment infrastructure. So people can deploy model quickly because the infrastructure are available. In other area, deploying model becoming itself expensive technology project because there's no infrastructure. So I want to ask Meena, because your background is on technology here. So the bottleneck, the pain point here, because data scientists, they want to be data scientists, and deployment is not their domain. Deployment is typically technology domain. How can we, or what is the challenge here, and what's the direction to make model deployment becoming less expensive technology project?
Yes, so that is also a capability that ModelOps offers, end-to-end management of the model lifecycle, which includes deployment of the model or creation of the deployment pipeline on a click of a button. So the tool that we have looked at has capability to integrate different technology into an open canvas that can integrate the Bitbuckets or Jenkins for deployment. So on a click of a button, this whole process could be automated rather than manually taking efforts. And then there is also a workflow and a log of various steps that needs to happen in order to take the model to production, and who is responsible for doing what. So once the model is developed, it's tested, trained, and it's ready for deployment, it gets approved. Then the technology partners who are part of the technology organization can work with the data scientists, but then there's everything available as part of the workflow. So it becomes more transparent, and there is more collaboration across different groups within the organization, and the pipelines can be integrated directly with the Bitbucket or Jenkins, right? And on the click of a button in the technologies that we use, we can achieve the orchestration of the model or deploying the model very easily, seamlessly, without any friction. Another caveat is, yes, I have my model in one tool and I have another model in another tool. There's open API integration to integrate all of these technologies together, so you can holistically view what are the models that are ready for deployment, what are the models that's still being developed in a different technology. So it's like a canvas that you can go and look at and be able to automate the process end to end holistically. And it's also a good capability that technologists can have, because if you have to go and look at the inventory of models and what's happening across different teams, it becomes a nightmare. However, this becomes very seamless with ModelOps and ModelOps Center.
Thank you. I want to, because we only have less than 5 minutes left, I want to, one subject that I think is very important, very critical, is in terms of when the model is in production and monitored. This is a very probably the least glorified area, right? But very tedious aspect. But it's super, super critical, because this is where rubber meets the road. Productionalized model, monitor them, run it smoothly as an operation. So, Jean-Luc and Stu, probably I would like to hear from you on this one here. The area that probably less glorified, but is super critical. How you see this model monitoring, model production, and get the data back to the database for future development or future learning?
Oh, I think it is the mission critical point of the whole story, because this is where the outcome will be produced, right? So this is also a place where there is really a need for automation as much as possible, because one thing we have not spoken yet is the fact that the cardinality of model is going to increase dramatically in the coming years, meaning that the number of models that people will execute in parallel, right, will be very, very large, right? Some extremes, today I'm already seeing some of our clients having 6,000 models running 24/7, because they're in the manufacturing industry and there's models in machines and tanks and reservoirs and all that kind of stuff. And, the production has to continue. So it is critical. Two things are important: maximizing self-healing capabilities, right, and techniques, right, so that you can minimize the number of times you have to call back a data scientist to say something went wrong, right? Somebody mentioned traceability, right? And I think it's traceability and historical traceability, meaning show me what happened when something bad has happened, what was the state at that time, right? And so sort of like the time machine of your model execution is very important, especially in regulated industry like healthcare, right? And then there's also the monitoring of the sort of compliance of the model to some ethical or responsible AI capabilities, right? Which is still a nascent domain, right? I don't think everybody's is standardized on defining what bias really means and all that kind of stuff. But I can see going forward the need of a permanent or running counter with each model of between 0 and 1, saying, I'm at 0, everything is fine, but now I'm getting close to 0.33, and that's a bad threshold, because that may mean that suddenly we're creating bias or other things. So I think it's absolutely the critical element, and the only way out is going to be automation, because when there are tens of thousands of models running, there is no way it can be done by human only, right? So at least that notion of the network operating center, but not for your network infrastructure anymore, Mr. CIO, but for your model infrastructure, right? You're going to need to have that, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Still sorry for the 1 minute
No,
so go ahead.
30 seconds. I think Jean-Luc said everything. I couldn't agree more. We talked about the pain points that drive an organization to a ModelOps capability, but the strategic value of ModelOps is about sustainability at scale. And you have to have lots of monitoring well outside the data science context, operational context, risk context, but the key is automated response. And so if you think of automated response at scale, that's a real strategic challenge.
Thank you so much, everybody. We are, as I said, it's going to be lively discussion, very complex subject. So thank you to all the panelists sharing your thought. And with that, I turn it back to you, Catherine.
Goose, thank you so much for moderating what was exactly that, a very lively discussion. And thank you to everyone for sending in your thoughts and questions. Do not worry, I know we didn't get a chance to cover them, but we are saving them. The wonderful Delia, who you cannot see, who is working tirelessly behind the scenes, is collecting all of these questions for the speaker meet and greet session later, where we will be discussing all of this. So make sure you join us for that last session of the day, because we're really going to dive into these a bit deeper. But yes, thank you, Goose, for moderating. Thank you to our wonderful panelists there. And without further ado, let's head into our next session, shall we, where we will be discussing model risk industrialization. And it is my pleasure to pass along the moderating baton to the wonderful Dave Trier, who's the VP of Product for ModelOps, who will be moderating this panel all about model risk. So Dave, if you are ready, I will hand over to you.
Excellent. And can you hear me okay, Catherine? Yep.
We certainly can.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thanks everyone for joining. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. As mentioned, my name is Dave Trier. I'm the VP of Product for ModelOps. I'm in charge of our strategy and roadmap for our enterprise ModelOps software, which focuses on the governance and end-to-end model lifecycle of all types of models. It's really my pleasure to be joined by a very experienced panel to discuss a hot topic for many enterprises out there, which is how do we industrialize model risk? As we heard from prior speakers, and many of the audience has seen in their day-to-day journey, that there's an exponential growth in the development of AI and other models across a variety of new technologies, serving new use cases, on-prem, in the cloud, multi-cloud, on the edge. So really the question is, and we're going to tackle that in our panel here, is how do we ensure that the enterprise has the appropriate risk management policies, processes in place to ensure that these models are not driving adverse consequences for the enterprise? So with that, let's first introduce our panel. Steve, might I allow you to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Sure can.
All right. That's test number one. My name's Steve Orris. I head up model risk management and validation at Citizens. We have the mandate to look at all models and increasingly also non-modeled AI ML across the entire enterprise. I've been in the chair for about 10 months. Prior to that, I was heading development at the bank. So I don't know if I'm on the dark side or the light side now, but I have moved roles. So I guess I have a unique perspective because I used to be one of the speeders and now I'm writing the traffic tickets, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Steve. Great to have you. Next, I'll turn to Brad.
Morning, everybody. Brad Seidler here. I'm from KeyBank. I've been in a similar role as Steve, senior leader within the model risk department, responsible for the technical validation and of models within consumer, commercial, fraud, a number of different areas as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. Next, I'll turn around the horn to Anthony.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Hi, Dave. Anthony Sepsi, partner in KPMG's modeling and evaluations practice with 25 years in banking analytics, started in structured finance, fixed income, and grew up through the CCAR, CECL regiment as far as model development and model governance. Our practice does a lot of work in support of model risk management. Happy to be here this morning.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. And last but not least, Jerry.
Hey, I'm Jerry Lavish. I'm a managing director in modeling evaluation at KPMG. And like Dave, I've straddled both the dark and the light side. Currently, I actually sit in the middle at KPMG. I've spent the last 5+ years in model risk management, first at large banks and more recently delivering with Anthony, a model risk management in the cloud offering that brings these industry-leading workflows, processes, and techniques to credit unions and other institutions, and working with ModelOps to help tie that all together. Happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jerry. And I just actually want to draw back to the prior discussion where Goose mentioned that financial institutions have had model risk management programs in place for years. These have been guided by the Federal Reserve, but in general, regardless of that, the guidance that has been put out and what these model risk management programs do are really just best practices for how models should be developed and actually institutionalized and used within, regardless of the industry, any enterprise overall. And furthermore, I've actually seen examples. We work with several customers outside of financial services that have implemented end-to-end model governance and risk management programs. So just for the audience, yes, we'll talk quite a bit about some of the experiences, financial services, et cetera. But again, these are broadly applicable to many other industries overall. So with that, I'm going to turn to our panelists and first start with some of the trends and challenges that we've seen recently as it relates to model risk management in the past few years. And I'm going to hit on a topic right away, which is the pandemic. So Steve, I'm going to turn to you and perhaps you can give us some of your experience and feedback about how the pandemic has actually affected model risk teams and the processes thereof.
The first thing that I've noticed, and again, I was on the development side, not in validation at the time, but what I noticed through the pandemic was a greater amount of collaboration, assistance. I mean, we still had separation of church and state. So, you know, they still, validation and development still had different reporting lines. But what was becoming very clear, especially early on in the pandemic, was and the analogy I've used many times is about a compound bow. And if you've never seen one, a compound bow is a bow and arrow with winches and pulleys and everything. And what was becoming clear was that the developers built the compound bows. So we built models for loss forecasting, CECL, CCAR, all that stuff. And they were fit for purpose. But what wound up happening was we were suddenly trying to land a bullseye in the middle of a hurricane. That didn't mean that the compound bow was no longer fit for purpose. What it meant was you needed an army of people surrounding the archer to make sure that you could land that thing. And what I saw during the pandemic was, and I've been doing this about 30 years, a relatively unrivaled level of collaboration and focus on the customer, the client, and colleagues to make sure that when you landed that bullseye, you were getting the right input. And in particular, what happened was the validation team got together with our development team, and we assessed that the reason why the models were cranking out, billions of potential losses was in part because the economic forecast was showing unemployment going through the roof, but the resultant carnage wasn't crystallizing because of the unrivaled stimulus, forbearance, and other types of things that were going on. And we collaboratively came upon this solution, which is what we call model input risk. And it wasn't the risk that the betas and the coefficients, or as I would like to say, the compound bow was not fit for purpose. It was that there was a divorce between this SIP and unemployment and the resulting credit losses. And so we collaboratively worked together to assess what would be the best way there for it to use this compound bow to land the bullseye. And I won't disclose any corporate secrets, but most of us are smart and you can probably figure out what you could do. And so for me, the big takeaway from the pandemic, outside of the fact that people who usually were sheltered and never saw the light of day, all of a sudden, developers, quants, validation people were getting in front of executive committee members and really demonstrating their worth and value to the company. So there was a human component as well as we've now risen to the challenge that was in many ways sort of the only highlight out of this thing. You had mentioned CCAR and CECL, Basel II also. Those of us to a certain extent have been through all these things, and I don't know if we have regulators on the call, but I would, under mild torture, only admit this. They were great obstacle courses. I was used to being exhausted, sleep deprived, and everything else because I'd done CCAR for a number of years. So in some ways, it was sort of validation and development's shining moment. Now that we've sort of won the war, I don't want to lose the peace, which, and I think we'll talk about that a little later on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, we're going to talk quite a bit about organization here going on, but great insight overall about how the pandemic, the shifting landscape in this time, in terms of macroeconomic shifting landscape, actually had an effect from a model and of course, model risk management. I actually want to skip onto the technology, and I'm going to come back to how the digitization world has also been a shift. But as you've mentioned, one of the other things that we heard early on, and Steve Philpott mentioned in his last discussion was that enterprises really need that freedom of innovation on the model development side to produce the best model, which is great, but it's also led to a plethora of different technologies being used for model development, as well as where those models are actually running. I actually worked with a large financial that had over 30 different model development tools. So I'll turn to you, Jerry. As if you think about it, you said you've been on both sides of the fence, if you will, but if you think about from a model risk perspective, how are those changes in technologies that developers are actually using, that first line business teams are actually using, how has that affected model risk processes and effort overall in your experience? You're on mute, Jerry.
That's a great question because what we've seen on both the first line and the second line is there's a huge shift away from a lot of these captive platforms to open source cloud, and that has presented with it a whole host of security challenges, as well as things around, like, how do you take an existing testing framework and adapt that to the open source? How do you take, so I've been driving a very large opportunity at a large bank. We've been doing all the performance monitoring for all of their retail credit models, and they are literally shifting to open source, and that has forced everybody to take a step back and take a real hard look at that code base and we're trying to build tools. It's created a challenge in the sense that you got to rebuild your tools, but it's also a positive, because now we're rebuilding these tools in a way that transcend the entire code base. So instead of building a tool for these 3 models and a tool for those 4 models and another tool for these 7 models, we can actually build a layer and build it properly and do it organically, because we're beginning to wipe the slate, so to speak. And it's a huge opportunity for model risk management to take a step back and have a hands-on approach and be partners with the first line to help develop these tools, so that later on, when you're talking about reviewing the entire model inventory and the model base around performance spikes, threshold breaches, etc., it becomes an apples to apples comparison, and you can actually look at the entire model inventory with one lens, and as an output from that, all of your management reports, all of your reports to the regulators, everything are all consistent. So this shift is driving a lot of spend, but it's also going to ultimately drive consistency.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jerry. Just the ability with just, again, the shifting landscape from a technology perspective, organization, economic, et cetera. This really is, in our experience, the catalyst to actually make investments for that consistency, that help to drive standardization, allow that freedom of innovation, but still have the consistency and the oversight on how you do governance, how you do processes, how you do model risk management. So couldn't agree more, Jerry. I actually want to come back to another trend overall, and this one's for you, Brad, is around digitization. Obviously, within the banking industry, digitization is huge, but every industry, digitization has been a huge program over the last couple of years, but really has been accelerated with the pandemic. So in your experience, how have you seen that the digitization increase the importance of model risk management overall?
Yeah, I think it's a great trend, because it has a lot of opportunity. Really, with digitization, you have a wealth of data, you have connectivity to different data sources, and those are the raw materials of models and insights from those. From that standpoint, it's really ripe for those types of things that Jerry was also mentioning, of standardization, of model risk management, helping to drive consistency and alleviate some burden in some ways of leveraging institutional approaches in that dimension. I did want to bring up a slightly different context to this, which is, as well as kind of the internal sourcing of data, you also have a lot more engagement with fourth parties, with software as a service type of platforms, which are really novel trend to a certain degree for model risk management, because your ability to access and understand those models directly is much more limited than if it's internally built or even in a third-party relationship. And that kind of poses some more of the governance angles of model risk management beyond just kind of the bread and butter of looking at how to build a model and how to test it, because an institution has to be prepared for managing fourth parties. So a fourth party is when you have a engagement with maybe a provider like Epsilon or Google or somebody that's assembling insights for you, but you're leveraging another vendor from their stack as well. And part of what is challenging is that you won't have the same insight, and they may not necessarily be there for a long term. They might be supporting an engagement on a temporary basis. And as a governance responsibility, you have to be ready to shift resources, to shift away from that fourth party, or leverage a different approach. So it brings much more of the contingency and vendor management considerations into model risk management as a unique consideration with this digitization opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brad. If we work with a lot of financials as well as others, that business units have gone out and just purchased not only third-party models, but then they purchased software that had embedded models inside of those particular applications. So overall, how do they grapple with that? And also, who owns it? And maybe I'll turn to you, Steve, because I know you have a little bit of experience around really who owns that process, right? Is it a traditional model risk team, a compliance team? Is it the business unit that purchases it? Who owns it, identifying if this is a model of risk-bearing asset within the organization?
Right. Ironically, while everybody was talking, I was taking notes because I saw Brian Wood asked, I think, just about the same question, which is, in this labyrinth, who's doing what? And I can just tell you our recent experience, and it's AI/ML is kind of thrusting this into the forefront. And what I mean by that is, and I'm looking, we've got 6 people on this panel and 146 participants. So out of 150-ish people, if we asked what is AI/ML, we would probably get more than 150 responses and answers, and each of them equally applicable and equally, spirited in their defense. And what that has given rise to is there's a bunch of things like a chatbot, which some people consider AI/ML, some people don't. I'm not going to start that fight. But a simple chatbot needs some level of oversight, because you don't want that chatbot, unintentionally sending people who look like me down one chute and people who look like Jimi Hendrix down a different chute. You got to be careful of this stuff. And so what has happened is this vacuum of oversight has just suddenly been thrust into the forefront. So to answer the narrow and distinct question, model risk management and validation has an opportunity to grab the mantle. And to a certain extent, I think it's kind of being thrust upon us, because a lot of people like to say, you guys and gals are the only smart ones, you can do math and stuff like that. And I know when I'm being flattered, and I also know when I'm being handed, an unfunded mandate. But in all honesty and candor, I do believe that we have the DNA to sift through risks and assess, is it a model? Isn't it a model? And if it isn't a model, what is the best way to handle it? And Brian, just with regard to your question, the way we see it is there's a governance component, which is how is oversight provided? So we have put together a AI/ML forum where these things kind of get trotted in front of this panel. And the idea is you get a one-page write-up. For those of you who are credit people, it's like a green light memo. It's a one-page memo, gives some highlights about what the thing is, what is this widget. And then an August panel of developers and validators and other people look at it to assess, where does this fit within the organization? The compliance component, that is what needs to be governed, is not necessarily a model risk management job, but it is our job to know who are the smart people, in particular fair lending and fair banking, to reach out to. And then that becomes a little bit of a management dance, because I don't want to take my fair lending people who've got lots of good things to do and suddenly give them a test on heteroscedasticity and cool stuff like that. Their job is to point out to us which are the variables that are creepy, what are the things you need to worry about, and not to go back to the prior discussion, but monitoring and output, in many ways is the acid test. So how does this all fit together? And I'd love to tell you I have the answer fully baked. The cake is currently, I don't even think it's in the oven. I think we're still mixing everything. But it is something that is it's there. It's right in front of you. And I don't love the idea of taking on responsibility without headcount to actually execute against this risk, but it's there and I think it's ours.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. And I do want to come back to that organization question, but maybe I'll ask Anthony or Jerry just to, based on your experience working across multiple customers, the question from Brian came in about, who owns this within the organization? Do you handle both the compliance and the governance within the same organization, or are they in different parts of the organization overall? Maybe Anthony or Jerry, you want to give a little bit of insight into what you've been seeing based on your experience there.
Yeah, Dave, interesting questions. I think there is a lot of diversity out there. Traditionally model risk, they're in the second line. They own the risk management. They drive a lot of the governance, but it is very much a collaborative process with the first line people that really are the first line of management of that risk, develop a lot of the tools and analytics. So there's a little bit of a collaborative process. I know one of the big GSIB banks, when I read their overall governance policy, I love the idea that everyone is a risk manager in their mindset, and everyone from the developer to the second line to the third line that comes in and audits the application of policies and procedures and so forth. So it is a loaded question, but as we all know, and the interest in forums like this, analytics drives the banking business in many ways, and I think it does take a community versus segmented groups to kind of do this effectively.
Yeah, no, and I to layer on top of what Anthony said, that's exactly right. And then you take it out to the third line. You've got especially internal audit, whose whole role in this is to make sure that risk is doing its job and making sure that there's adherence to all these policies and procedures, and that the policies and procedures are consistent with what the regulatory and or if they have access to it, what the peers are doing. So it's a loop, and it takes a village, so to speak, and it's a feedback loop that requires the first, second, and third line. Everybody needs to be involved. I love Anthony's comment. It's absolutely apropos. Everybody's a risk manager, and at the end of the day, it's like I live in New York City. See something, say something. It's the exact same thing here. So.
No, thank you so much. So we talked a lot about some of the challenges that we've seen. So let's flip to the opportunities, right? So let's talk about some of the ways that the folks on the webinar here today can actually capitalize on some of these shifting trends overall. So actually, I wanted to start with organization. So Steve mentioned a little bit around taking an elevated role overall, that model risk teams are taking a larger roles and helping organizations pave the way for the future of AI. I'm going to turn to you, Brad, if you may, talk a little bit about what is that opportunity for model risk teams to take more of a leadership role in helping define how to properly use and become more AI driven as an enterprise overall.
Yeah, and in general, I think all model risk teams have that accountability as part of their charge, but it is a great opportunity for these institutions to be able to leverage that type of leadership role. What I would say is that what you're seeing with this AI ML adoption is that there's a lot more of different functional areas that haven't necessarily been players in the model life cycles before. They're coming in new areas, they're coming in different departments and so forth. And model risk is really kind of that central part of the institution that has that enterprise mandate. And so they can help to both drive practices and set expectations through standards and training to these newer adopters. They can also help to drive maybe more classical approaches into new approaches and things like that, where there might be other opportunities. Because ultimately, while our teams are model risk, we're really model evangelists in a way. We want to see the institution using models because we believe in them. We think that they are good tools to be used. We think that there should be some guardrails, and that's part of our mandate. But candidly, it's the only way to deal with the scale of data and to get the deeper insights that are really going to be valuable. So more broadly, model risk has a very important role with that. And how does that actually come into play with, driving the change that institutions may actually need? Well, it's very cross-functional. It's not about the model developers and model validators only and the model users. It intersects with technology a lot. It intersects with security practices that are important for cyber defense and things like that. And so there's an opportunity to drive more of that cross-functional engagement. And at Key, that's the way that we've started down that journey. We had a collaborative working group that is taking on different dimensions: fairness, technology stack, code-based, training, that had representatives from each of these teams and more, the line of businesses, of course, as well. But what it did do is it helped to kind of put a central spotlight as to this is a change that is needed, and it needs attention, and it needs support. And so those different working groups got channeled through governance bodies, model risk committee at our institution, but also some of those other intersections where it can impact architecture review boards and things like that, where there's a natural intersection between these teams to help drive that adoption. And so I guess my parting comment on, there's a leadership need because it's going to impact a lot of different areas. It is the charge of the model risk team as a part of their core accountability to be a part of that, but they can't do it alone. They need to build the partnerships because otherwise you don't get the adoption that actually generates the value the institutions need.
That's awesome, Bradley. I love that. Being a model evangelist, I think that's amazing, right? A lot of times that the model risk teams are thought somewhat as the cop, if you will, but really they are the evangelists to make sure that these models, which are providing substantial value, are actually doing it in a way that is not done and has adverse potential consequences overall. So I love that overall. And another thing that was brought up as in your comments there, Bradley, but also in other topics earlier, was about just by the nature of model risk teams being independent from the model developers. And Steve talked about this in the last one about how this is an enterprise function, right? And that's one of the major pieces that we're seeing with model ops as being an enterprise function. Allow the business units, model developers to develop and have that freedom of innovation to produce the best model for the business outcome. But you need that enterprise function that is, as you said, the evangelist for putting the guardrails in place, making sure that they're thinking about everything that needs to be done when it actually is put into operations being used, all the different risk components around that overall. So that's just some of our experience in that realm. But one of the other things you mentioned, Brad, was that there's a lot of different touch points, right? That SecOps gets involved, and of course the business unit production systems gets involved. And now again, we have multiple different new teams that actually don't have a background in model development in the past that are starting to develop models. So I turn to you, Anthony, just to talk a little bit about with this shifting landscape of new technologies, new usage for models, new teams using models. How do you see opportunity to drive some of that consistency across it? Because as an enterprise function, again, you want to make sure there is consistency, there is guardrails, such that those models are actually producing the best outcomes for the business. So maybe you touch on that, Anthony.
Yeah, Dave, I'll say this, in my opinion, in travels around model risk and financial services and banking, the process has been very much siloed over, since SR 11.7 came out back in 2011. You get the model development people, the model risk. I think we are in much more, with this digital landscape, a much more fluid environment. There's still a lot of the handoffs and the bridges that connect, business development to model risk management and so forth, create a lot of time and inefficiencies in the system. And I do think, and like the last panel and into this panel to some extent, I think we are in an area where we need to re-engineer this whole process. I even think of the way the inventory systems work in model risk management. It's very much like an old warehouse, vis-a-vis what I do think is we need like a NASA control panel, right? That's continuously monitoring, assessing risk, communication between model owners and risk managers. Brad mentioned earlier just the acceleration and the amount of third-party. It's like you're having a house and you're building way more windows and pipes to access that house. And the internet is nothing more than allows 24/7 access to your company. And these are, it's digitally controlled through analytics and so forth. It just creates an immense amount of work and risk. And I think the current old school methodologies that we have here with these definitive silos and that sort of communication needs to be completely re-engineered. I think it's like, you look at our Formula One racing cars today, there's way more horsepower out of much smaller engines. It's that sort of, I think, re-engineering of technology to kind of make this, a much more efficient, effective way to manage risk. At the end of the day, there's a tremendous amount of intangible risk appetite that's consumed with models and by models that, needs to be managed. And it gets more, I think it accelerates with the advent of AI, machine learning, and the way it's being used across these organizations. So we definitely need to, take a serious look and re-engineer the way we're doing this, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Anthony. And there's a couple comments that really struck me. One is that there's silos, right? And those are different teams are siloed from each other. But the other piece that just in our experience and our perspective is that today's world, there's the developers and the validation or risk teams, right? And there's a very static view of all the different models out there. And in the new age, especially with AI, which are constantly changing, you need to shift that to a dynamic view, a dynamic evergreen view of all your different models that you have running, regardless of the technology, regardless of the use case, regardless of the business unit, regardless if it's a third party or fourth party. You need that dynamic view at all times. It can't be a static spreadsheet, if you will, of the different models.
At the end of the day, too, these models are static. They're built, they're trained off historical data. There is a lag. CECL really escalated this. There's a pro-cyclical nature, counter-cyclical nature to models. They get skewed very quickly. So that the time and the lag there, I think, creates a tremendous amount of risk that I think new processes need to be re-engineered to cut that lag down and get much more of an effective response to problems that are naturally going to evolve with models. Because listen, nobody anticipated what happened in 2020, and our models reflected that. So, and it's that sort of environment, we really need to reconsider and use technology to make it more effective.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Anthony. And I'll turn to you, Jerry. You also mentioned also about the different handoffs. A lot of that's done manually today. But when we talk about it, and once we start to apply some of that consistency, which a ModelOps capability can actually help you allow for, what can you then do from an automation perspective? If you have that consistency across, how do you take it to the next level with automation?
It's actually a great question because this shoehorns exactly what Anthony said. All that consistency can be driven directly through automation. What can you automate? Well, in my opinion, you can automate almost every aspect of model risk management. You can have a risk ranking system that is highly automated and subject to review, but it can take 80% of the risk ranking out of the equation. You can automate identifying models across your entire organization, candidate models that could then be put through whatever scorecard or whatever process you have to determine whether it's a model, non-model, or tool. I think that there's another opportunity to completely manage and automate the model risk management lifecycle workflows. What do I mean by that? Well, when you have a validation done and there's a finding or an observation, well, that finding or observation could run through a workflow as part of your inventory and immediately notify the model owner and or the validator. And then as that observation or finding is remediated, it could then notify the model owner and then any approvals. And so that cycle of model risk management having to chase after people and become a very manual process goes away. You could automate all of your validation reporting. So I know ModelOps has a product that helps automate some of the validation aspects, but the reporting itself, and then more importantly, your performance monitoring. This is something we're doing at a large bank, and we've automated a huge amount of the performance monitoring aspect, from identifying breach thresholds, generalizing findings, categorizing those findings, initiating the change management as needed, and interactive performance tracking reports. Much to what Anthony said before about a model ops center, an MOC. I think that's very key. One of the things we talked about earlier, the pandemic, we noticed that for a huge the portfolio of retail credit models, there was a FICO spike that did not consistently line up with default rates. Well, you're not going to take all those models and refactor them. Instead, you have to take a step back and take another approach. But all of those breaches were automated, so we knew as it was happening that this was going through the entire model lifecycle, and we're able to react appropriately. So at the end of the day, it comes out of automation. And one of the things Anthony and I have done and have been doing for several institutions is helping them automate that entire process through an inventory, through working with ModelOps itself, and through everything across the entire model lifecycle aside from creating the models themselves? You know, Anthony, do you want to chime in? I know this is something that we've done successfully.
Yeah, no, I think the thing I would add is, listen, the typical validation, and we've done a lot over the decade, you know, it's anywhere from 250 hours to 600 hours, right? And I think with automation tech, you can cut that down and spend a lot more time on effective challenge and outcome analysis, sensitivity. That's where the real value to the organization is vis-a-vis replicating what the development people did. So I think we're trying to look at that 250 to 600 hours, reduce the manual processes to a fraction of that, so you can spend a lot more time on the effective value added pieces of this, which is the outcome of the models, and do they make sense, and is there a real, you know, a strong challenge process around that. So yeah, that's kind of the way we think about the future and where it needs to go in this area.
Couldn't agree more, Anthony, that you want your seasoned model validation folks to focus on the true risk of the model, the expert judgment, challenging the model overall, not spending time on plumbing, not spending time on menial tasks, back and forth.
Two areas that I would like to throw in. Listen, every model validator and modeler hates documentation. Too much time is spent over there. So, and then the, you know, like again, I can't emphasize enough of the effective challenge and the ability to really kind of, you know, whether it be benchmark models or white papers, but I think there's a lot more value to come out if time is freed up to do that. And then I think the other comment I was just actually escaped my mind is we're all dealing with the great churn, you know, as far as the retaining talent and the consistency in our talent pools. This brings, that helps mitigate that risk as well.
So there's some light at the end of the tunnel, right? We see this gauntlet of new models and new technologies, but there's light, right? There's really the catalyst to drive consistency, to use automation to really to keep pace with the innovation, as well as just the influx of new models. So
it's light and multiple tunnels, right?
That's true. Yeah. So I guess, Brad, I turn to you on overall, who in your experience and your perspective actually might own that sort of automation type program as it relates to overall model risk? Where would you see that lying in an organization?
So that would not be within the model risk departments generally, because that's really the independent oversight. That would best be served by probably a center of excellence, a team that has a substantial scale of the models, and that might be multiple teams potentially depending on the organization, but it should be really centrally owned by that team that has the highest scale of and the expertise to manage it and propose changes to it as a, you know, a first line of defense owner. So the model risk team is really there to kind of be that oversight and challenge and be a partner in that, because by leveraging these types of structures, you gain speed to market, you gain resiliency, as Jerry mentioned with the pandemic part. And they are, you know, that partnership is such a critical factor in the success and the ability to get the full value out of it. But it makes most sense to be in the first line because of that independent consideration. So probably the data science teams.
Okay, well, thanks, Brad. And I know we're going to run out of time, but I do have one question for Steve here is, let's just take the worst case scenario, right? So, and you have AI models especially, what would you recommend to the audience about helping to protect against those worst case scenarios of AI gone wrong in production?
You mean making sure they're not Skynet?
Funny you should say that, Jerry. When I told my son I was taking over this job, he said, "So you're now in charge of Skynet?" I said, "No, my job is to ensure Skynet never gets implemented."
Exactly.
Okay, and you know, as that great sage Ben Parker said, with great power comes great responsibility. And to that point, how do we avoid Skynet? How do we avoid these things? And I don't want to oversimplify things, but I think it's monitoring. And I'd go a bit of a step further and say monitoring, but through validation, what you should do is say, and I think this probably applies to econometric as well as AI ML types of models, is that when you approve something, you should have a challenger. I don't like challenger because some people just think challengers are like throwaway, you know, tools that you build, but have an actual like dueling competition in the development. I know we don't like to think of statisticians and econometricians as competitive, but put some competition in there. build the best model, and then the runner-up, implement that at the same time and monitor the daylights out of the results. And if it turns out that, going back to the Steve Boris, Jimi Hendrix comparison, if it turns out that you see some creepy things coming out of the model, pull the plug and make that challenger the automatic model. You flip the switch, the business continues delivering value for the shareholders. You don't redline anybody, and you show that you are now part of the strategic component of the bank, as opposed to just a box checker or a mathematician. I had a boss when I was at HSBC who I was in development. I said he was my CCO, and I said, I want to make sure that our quants are bankers. And he said, no, Stephen, they're business people. And that's to a certain extent, I was talking when Bradley was talking about evangelization. I worry more, not so much about evangelization, but about snake oil salesmen leading people to error. Sometimes it is a light at the end of the tunnel, and other times it's a train that's going to kill you. And I do think we are well positioned to be part of that discussion. I have a slight difference of opinion about whether or not the central area should be pushing a lot of this stuff, because sometimes they just don't have that understanding of, clean data is really important. And sometimes if your data lake is a swamp, you're not going to get it. So I do think, though, that if you have a strong model development, model validation function that gets that seat at the table, then you can avoid this descent into error, and you can have good evangelization with good dogma. And then just in closing, you have to do it in a way where you, the validation folks, don't come across as, I'm a Rush fan, so as the priests of the Temple of Syrinx that tell everybody what good is. This is a collaborative effort. And if you come across really arrogantly, you're going to find yourself unemployed quickly.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate that. And your comment about having the automatic ability to roll back to the challenger model, which wasn't quite as good, didn't quite make it there. That's absolutely in line with the vision of model ops as a capability, is having, again, that dynamic connection between not only the models, but the actual systems that run those with the actual automated monitoring that's going on. So it all comes together as part of a general model ops program and approach. We only have 3 minutes left, and there's one question from the audience I wanted to make sure we get to overall, which is, the question is, SOX 404 reporting a material event. Does this include model output? And if not, should it? So perhaps Anthony or Jerry, you want to take that one?
Yeah, again, on a material event, if there is some sort of analytics that are coming out of a model, obviously there's got to be strong controls in place. And I know from an audit perspective, we do look at all the way back to validation reports, the integrity and quality of that valuation, and make an assessment of that as an auditor. And that is part of the control framework that we're looking to assess under 404.
Yeah, and a material event is a material event. If you've got wonky output, it doesn't just happen by itself. So you have to figure out where that comes from. And so I would say yes, a material event's a material event, regardless of where it comes from in the entire process of from input to output, right, on a model.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. I know that there'll probably be many other questions overall, but just in the interest of time, I wanted to thank all the panelists for your comments, for all of the feedback. It's been a great discussion overall. For any of those in the audience, if you have further questions, feel free to send those along, and we'll look to address them in the overall speaker breakout. But thanks again for your time, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight into the challenges, but also the opportunities to help to industrialize model risk as a whole. Thank you.
Amazing, Dave. Thank you so very much. Thank you to each of our panelists there for their contributions. Absolutely fantastic. And just as David said there, we will collect up those questions that were in the chat and in the Q&A function, and we will be talking about them in the speaker meet and greet at the end of today's event. But moving swiftly on, our next discussion will all be about executive visibility for AI. And it is a pleasure to welcome back to the virtual stage to moderate this session Stu Bailey, who's the co-founder and chief enterprise AI architect for ModelOps. So Stu, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Catherine. And I think, Catherine, are we still waiting for Mario to join?
Yes, we're just having a couple moments of technical issue there, but he will be with us very soon.
Okay, great. So I'll just kick it off. So what a great panel. What a great event we've had so far, starting with Farhan's, I think, excellent keynote on ModelOps. And the last two panels, I think, have just been really tremendous. So now we'd like to talk we talked a lot about risk in the last panel, and we've seen a lot about the developments in industry around ModelOps all day. But we have a really distinguished set of practitioners to talk about trends in executive visibility for enterprise AI. And I mean, we are down the road a bit in enterprise AI investments. And so what we've heard over and over again in the market is there's just more interest in the executive level of we've been spending tens of millions of dollars on AI and ML initiatives. More and more models are coming out, and some of the board level and C-level questions around, where is this going, is driving some needs for visibility. And of course, because enterprise AI is, also a very technical subject that bleeds into monitoring and many of the other challenges for kind of comprehensive visibility around these enterprise assets, these decisioning assets called models. So that's what we'll talk about. We have Jody and Mario, who are two really storied practitioners in enterprise AI. So I think and I think for the audience, we really try to get a discussion going around these topics. I have a few questions, but again, Jody and Mario have been doing this for a very long time. So what I'll first do is just hand it over to the two of you for a brief introduction about you, and then I'll lob a few questions about kind of this trend in broader visibility, and we'll just see where things go. So let's start with you, Mario.
Thanks a lot. So obviously a pleasure to be here, and I'm in a passionate topic. It's like really deep to my heart. So a little bit background. So I'm a partner at Ernst & Young. I lead our risk practice, and I have a global leadership role associated with AI development that we do internally for the firm. So how we develop models internally to enhance our processes, but also externally how we actually support clients in their journey, where it's around the governance strategy associated with AI, the development of AI tools. Plus, I also lead our overall research associated with everything related to AI tooling, solutionings, and algorithms. So where we work together very closely with the large, let's call it the Canadian industry, but also globally on that note. So I'm more than happy to share a little bit on that from my perspective. 25 years in industry, so happy to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much, Mara. And Jody?
Hi, I'm Jody Blomberg, and I'm the Senior Director of Data Science and Machine Learning at Waste Management. I've been here about a year, and we do everything from what I consider to be kind of traditional, like customer lifetime value, which is highly valuable, but not a new concept for anyone, to computer vision. We have huge amounts of data streaming off everything we do, whether that's a truck, a landfill, or any of the other things we do. So we have lots of interesting data here. I'm only a year into my tenure. I came from Charles Schwab, where I had the same role, head of data science, and I had a little deja vu in the last presentation about model risk organization, which I don't have now. So certainly when I think about these topics, I have a really different perspective now that I'm not under financial regulation. And I'll end with, I do believe, I always thought this, and now I have to live it, which is there's the financial services industry has always been great about measuring their model performance and managing risk around models because they had to. And I would argue that every company probably should want to, right? Maybe not to the same risk as FINRA wants you to, but we should all want to know what's happening in our models and that they're working and they're making money. So now I get to live it. No one's making me do it.
Great, thanks so much, Jody. And I just got word, we do have a third panelist who should be joining us soon, Skip McCormick, who's the data science lead and for architecture in the Architecture and Data Office at Bank of New York Mellon. So if everyone's okay, he's having some technical difficulties. We'll add him when he joins. Again, just for the audience, I think we want to focus on Jody and Skip and Mario as practitioners. You probably know I'm the co-founder of ModelOps, a vendor in the ModelOps space and author of ModelOps for Dummies. So I'll try, again, I think we want to hear from the practitioners, but I'll try to provide a little color into what we're seeing in the marketplace as well around some of these topics. So just to get started, the ModelOps survey, which has been part of Kernium's kind of research in the ModelOps space that just came out today, says really only about 5% of organizations have full visibility into models that are really all the models that are in production across their enterprise. Just from your experience, Mario and Jody, what's the impact of a lack of visibility? What are the trends there? What's driving some needs for more visibility? Especially at the kind of executive or enterprise level, what is the conversation like, and how has that changed over the years? So maybe I'll just toss over to you, Mario, and then we can just see where it goes.
Thanks, Stu. Yep. So let me. I mean, I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's top of mind of everyone. My experience with this is generally. Is first of all the definition, what is a model, what is not a model. I think that's a conversation that happens all the time. And I think we've been involved in this for several years across the industries. And obviously now, Judy mentioned, I mean, industries outside of the financial service industry, much less regulation. And it doesn't mean always necessarily that they have less visibility or control over it. It just means there's different governance frameworks that are used for making sure. Because if I build a model and it's appropriate and I can actually price accordingly, who really needs to say the model is right or wrong? So there's a lot of reasons why different industries didn't use it. But I think generally from an AI angle, currently, the conversations go around, so what is the right amount of governance that we need, but also not knowing what we currently were using AI is generally driven by the fact of what is the reputational risks that we are exposed to, that we actually AI tool in use or algorithm in use. It could be different, whether it's an automation of a process, whether it's around a prediction that we use the model for. We are wrong in the estimation, but that's not different than using any type of analytics and statistical tooling as we did before. So yes, AI adds another layer of complexity in understanding what the output is as soon as we go, the maturity level of complexity of algorithm that we use for. But at the same token, nothing has changed so dramatically. I think what has changed, and I think this is where the bigger piece of conversation needs to happen, is associated with what is the additional data that we use. And, the access to more data and different data sources, which obviously relates to the topic, how do we manage data privacy topics that are usually coming along with the use of AI, right? So we were very good in using structured data sources for whatever analysis that we did, but now with the kind of use of unstructured data sources in a much more comprehensive manner, suddenly data privacy becomes an even more relevant topic. Plus, at the same token, is also the risk associated with the whole cyber threats associated with different capabilities, because the open source world, yes, it provides a huge amount of credibility when we use what is the best tooling for the next NLP language kind of algorithm. But at the same token, who has tested it? How do you need to integrate it into the system? Like, all these questions are generally now coming up again, where the overall risk framework of using AI is obviously driven by these factors, much more than a statistical instability, right? So I think the conversations that I'm involved in is much more surrounding these areas rather than, okay, do we have the right statistical significance or performance, et cetera? That's an additional conversation, but I don't see the biggest risk there, because the biggest risk is really not knowing where something is actually currently exposing the enterprise to a data privacy breach. And we've seen this now also in Europe, obviously driven by GDPR, much more prominent than it is in the US or in other North American. In Asia, there's also obviously now visibility around that topic on top of the regulatory plus also the governments, to make sure that the appropriate use is understood across the industries. And the other example is the European Commission. They're currently working on the next act associated with that. But delivering a certain understanding of what AI needs to do across the enterprise, that you really understand the risk. I think the biggest risk is not knowing where your risks are, to be honest. So
that's great. And Jody, before you chime in, maybe since Skip, welcome. Great to see you. And maybe Skip, just a little out of order, you can just say a few words about, again, you and your organization, and then we'll get back to the question of kind of how enterprise visibility requirements are changing on the enterprise AI journey.
Sure. Hi, I'm Skip McCormick. I run the data science infrastructure at Bank of New York Mellon, and we're a customer. We are building a comprehensive enterprise class infrastructure for doing predictive analytics, and a big part of that is how do you manage your model assets? How do you govern them?
Great, thanks so much, Skip. So Jody, did you have some thoughts about kind of how enterprise visibility requirements have changed over the last few years, and what it looks like going forward?
I do think that the risk that I fear is actually less about what my models expose me to some days than making sure candidly that the investment was worth it. We're a shiny object right now, whether we might benefit from that. There's high investment, but we have very high expectation, right? There's a pretty high expectation at the executive level that we, as I kind of joke around, I still don't have my magic wand, right? There's some things I cannot do. I think the other risk without the visibility, if you don't have the discipline to explain the ROI of your models, because it does take discipline to decide to track that, especially in cases where it's much mushier. So if I have a decision automation model, I can pretty much just add up the money, right? No business change necessary, it's just doing its job. The much more nuanced models, think about forecasting, think about decision support, think about models where there's overrides by humans, or think about where the business needs to enact change, right? Data science is often a change agent. If nobody changes what they're doing or something in the business doesn't change, we probably didn't do our job right. That means we're dependent on a whole host of people to make sure that our models make money. And I think trying to make sure that executives understand, even when we're choosing which problems are good candidates for AI, is helping them understand how much change management is that in the business side? Like, what is it going to take for you to get that return on investment? That is part of the total cost of ownership of a model that goes well beyond my AWS costs and my development costs. That's usually the cheapest thing, right? Is to put a data scientist and go make a model. Making it work can be expensive. And I think the risk of executives assuming they're going to get huge ROI without understanding the costs for them or into the business. It's definitely something I'm working on. It's the thing that has changed quite a bit, at least for me. I think in the last 10 years, as we used to just show up and sort of count the money. And now that AI is being infiltrated in more and more parts of the business are being used and we become more data-driven, the effects of those models are more nuanced and they're more dependent on human beings to make sure that they we extract the value out of them that we think we're pitching when we do the feasibility study.
Great, that's helpful. Skip, do you have any insight into kind of how your organization or in general the conversation has changed around executive level visibility and things like what Jody was mentioning, like ROI, really the ROI?
Well, there's I really like what Jody said, because I think she was right on. That sometimes it's really easy if you're building models like our forecasting trade fails. You can see what would have happened without the forecast, by doing math, and you can see we saved this much in overnight interest or this much in penalties, and it's the ROI is kind of easy to calculate. For other ones where you're helping your peers or your clients make better decisions based upon a better understanding of the future, there's no such thing as a crystal ball. It's all predictive analytics with probabilities. It's no different than the weatherman problem, right? When the weatherman tells you it's a 10% chance of rain and you don't take your umbrella and then it rains, you feel like the weatherman got it wrong. right? Even though, and I should say weather person, I guess, but even though you would have had to actually go back in time and repeat that day 100 times to see if 10 of the times it rained and 90 it didn't, to see if the weather forecast was correct, still feels wrong. And in that context, there's a kind of a culture change going from models that are statistics and math based, where you can spend 6 months and a lot of PhD brain power to make sure the model is perfect and the results are always reliable, into this new world where we deliver a model and we tell them the model is going to be wrong this much of the time based upon careful metrics. That's hard. That's a culture change, and I think Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? It takes a while to get sort of people used to thinking that way, and you have to sort of, at least my strategies, I have forays into a lot of different lines of business, because you just never know which one is going to be the one that sort of you make some headway on. The risk is that they all kind of hit at the same time, and then suddenly you have to deal with it. But I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's where my head went when Jody was talking. That was excellent, Jody. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, and it's a great segue, actually, Skip, to what are some, as we have heard all day with ModelOps, and what you both, all three of you have been talking about in terms of, as practitioners, there are just different types of models, and that doesn't seem to be changing. There are different types of models, there are different types of challenges technically, and even the types of risk or return that are being carried by models can really change with the business use case. So to get a kind of comprehensive view, what are some of the challenges that you are facing, or even anticipate, as the amount of energy on enterprise AI continues to increase at that business unit level, given the potential for diversity of models and operating environments, etc., and business return metrics? And any one of you can jump into that.
I'll just say my same struggle, which is the metrics aren't the same for every model, right? I got, with all due respect to all my vendors, I know we care about drift, but it's usually not the only thing I care about, right? And even with a model risk team, sometimes being more accurate on the whole is not helpful if we only use the top 20% of the scores, right? So everything feels like a special snowflake sometimes. And so really putting together a framework for total cost of ownership, for ROI, is still at this point for me kind of an individual process by model. And I don't really see a way out of that in some ways, because it really matters how it's implemented, back to that human part, right? Like what's my potential value and what's my realized value? And my only goal, even though I have not solved it, is to try to make sure that my business partners get that thinking, right? That's for me, the goal with executive visibility is to make sure they understand that when they ask us to do something, or we come with an idea to do something, when we give them our business case, we are gonna measure it after. This is how we're gonna measure it. This is what I need you to do, and just kind of getting them even thinking in that framework, so that my fear is always being judged by the wrong KPI.
Any other thoughts, Mario, Skip?
Well, I'll sort of echo that, and the metrics is a big part of it. And there's a new class of models, sort of in a way we talk about them, is this idea of meta models. We have models to watch our models, right? Every model has a potential for unfair bias or unfair prejudice. You have to expect that there's bias in the input data. It's always there because it's from the past, right? And so you have to have models that watch that. Does the result treat all of the different ways you can group the data the same way or in a fair way? Those are models that are sort of a library of models that you add to models to add those additional metrics, right? So it's not, as Jody said, it's not just drift or precision or recall or F1 score. All those things are essential, obviously, but there's also stability. And when you talk about stability, it's really the model has to have high traction to the data. So you're talking about stability of the data, right? If the model's stable but the data is not, that's actually a problem. So then you have to have models that watch your data, models that watch for the completeness of the data. Is something missing, and that would cause an outcome. And then all these other models for explainability and transparency. Transparency means different things for different kinds of models. Explainability is sort of a catchphrase that means something like, can I explain why this answer happened? Sometimes it means, can I trace this answer backwards through the data and see if I would have agreed with the outcome if I had looked at all those things? Sometimes it means, what's the trending metrics? Is it getting more precise over time a little bit, right? Because it's a convolutional neural net. Nobody can explain how that works or why, but I could, if I have the right metrics, I can say it was, my precision was 74% last month, and this week it's been 74.6%, and today it's 74.65%. And that sort of gives you a sense that, okay, it's getting a little bit more accurate or a little bit less accurate. That's kind of how we operate in the real world too. So there's a whole set of additional metrics that that may or may not apply. And as Jody said, each different model, somebody has to think about that and say, these are the sort of meta models that should be attached to that model. And these are the metrics that should go on it. And then the whole discussion about what are the thresholds where something changes? Like if this metric goes above this, threshold or below that one, what do we do, right? Is there some automatic thing that warns the user like, hey, you shouldn't trust this today? Or does it cause it to go retrain? Or what does it do? Does it take the results away so nobody can use them? All of these things are tough. And the decisions about deciding where those thresholds are is sort of the first stage. But the next stage, because it's a trend, and this is the part that's exciting for me, is it's because it's a trend. Now I have curves. And so I can see the velocity of my changing metric, and I can project when I'm going to cross the threshold if the velocity doesn't change. And then I can see when the velocity changes, there's an acceleration, like it's getting more accurate or getting less accurate or getting more transparent or getting less fair or something like that. All of those are like, it's like predicting the prediction, right? And so you get into this kind of jerk space where you're at the fourth integral or something, and so that's a whole new way of thinking as well, right? And that's kind of why you have to have a enterprise system to sort of organize all that and come up with a consistent way, because there's data scientists all over the firm. They're all just trying to get the best answer, and if they grade their own papers, you don't know how to compare them. You have to have this sort of independent third place where these metrics are consistently applied, so that we can make the right decisions, so that the risk management organization can appropriately govern the risk. That's the big deal.
So one point I would add, just given Jody's points, there's a huge necessity for different metrics, as we mentioned, and I think we agree on that. It's even dependent on the model, the underlying algorithm that is used, right? So if you supervised, there's very different requirements as you use for reinforcement learning, and there's different definitions that we can agree on, but I think they need a different dimension in terms of complexity associated with what the use is as well. I think one other point that I would add, which we haven't addressed yet, I would expect the differentiation between the complexity of the models will play a role of how much scrutiny we put around certain thresholds and the performance testing requirements, the maintenance of the performance testing, how many, does it have to be in real time? Can it be done on a monthly basis? Can it be done depending on the use case, the complexity of the model? So what I'm trying to allude towards is like a little bit of tiering and a differentiation between the risks that are actually associated with the algorithm or the AI, plus also the use case, dependent obviously then on what we agree on how we measure the risk, right? Is it complexity, materiality of that? Like, what is the business impact? What is the kind of the complexity of the overall judgment that we have to make with that decision? Is there heavy data that is used from a PAI perspective, et cetera, et cetera? So I think if you start finding that differentiation, you would also define what the thresholds are, and the KPIs will probably differ as well, associated with a high risk, medium, and low risk kind of tool, which I think is something that we are more, used to in the financial service industry, because we were asked to do that and differentiate. Everything outside of that industry, we haven't done that. But I think this is where generally I do see currently some industries are coming really to the current evaluation, because we cannot do the same kind of performance testing for every AI tool that we use. I mean, as of today, yes, there's probably the amount of models or tools that we use is still feasible, but as soon as we get to a stage where we have 100, 1,000 models in place, it's impossible to put the same scrutiny on every single individual model. So I think that differentiation will come with the adoption, with the maturity level, and then obviously the definition will be related to the business, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's just another layer of what I would say when we talk about that topic that I do see governance-wise and framework-wise will be probably coming into effect soon.
And Mario's
I'll just
right.
add there. Yep.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to. Go ahead.
Mario's right in the sense that comes when we start having aggregated models. When we have a single model that's really an aggregate of 5 or 6 models that each have their own criteria before you fuse and suppress them, then it gets what he's saying is like times 100 harder.
Yeah, and I'll just say that from our perspective, we've really just to highlight exactly these trends that all three of you are pointing to, which is when it comes to kind of ROI and business value assessment, that's a very model use case specific kind of question. We were brought to that very naturally because it's also a maturity question. And as Mario pointed out, like financial services is, and actually Jody pointed out and Skip knows, financial services has been more mature in the enterprise AI journey, though that's changing, very fast now. We see so many other sectors coming into that kind of model ops space. But in financial services, risk industrialization had the same type challenges. You have kind of enterprise patterns, but there are going to be validation tests and other stress tests that are very specific to types of models. And so you really need a framework that had captured, the important kind of common areas, but could go, really be configured on a per model basis or a per use case basis as well, and try to provide. So it was very natural for us to start providing kind of executive visibility as a capability, because that same kind of pluggable kind of architecture allowed that just one more aspect of a model's journey to be kind of governed with a certain amount of visibility. And then we expect to, just like in the case of, what do you do when something gets out of line? Do you send a report? Or do you actually do something operationally? We expect as more and more kind of executive visibility, including business value, becomes just what you'd expect. That continues to allow automation for a pretty top level response going forward. So and actually maybe that's a segue to, and we're getting close to the end here, but I guess we have a little bit more time. I'll go up to the top of the hour. But that's a segue to who owns this? So that's been a journey, I think for model ops questions in general, because there's so much appropriate investment, and will continue to be appropriate investment in really the data science part. I always think of data science as, it's really a search for a great model. It's not really an engineering problem. It's an analytical problem, and it requires specific, business metrics to be good, and it requires data, and it's a search. So it's not really like developing software. And so, but that's where a lot of the activity is in terms of spend, hiring data scientists. But what we're talking about now with executive visibility, it's really an enterprise pattern, right? So can be pretty far away from the specific, the specifics of data science. So who owns executive visibility in organizations? So that's, I'll just throw it out. Anyone's welcome to answer. And do you see that changing over time?
None of us want to answer, Stu. No. I'm pretty sure it's me. I mean, not whether I like it or not. And that's just because if I've got AI in different lines of business, they can't own the whole picture for the company, right? And I would also say, and this is something I don't get too much pushback on. I want my business partners to agree with me, and I definitely want my software engineering team to agree with me. But the only person who's going to know if the model is working and if it's making money and how to measure that is probably the person that built it. And so, ergo, I think we have to earn our keep on the maintenance side to take, is that a data scientist's favorite job? No, not always, right? They built the model, it goes in production. They'd probably like to let that run and work on something new and interesting instead. And, I don't think we get that luxury sometimes. I think we have to define those metrics up front, get the business to sign off on it. And then frankly, if you are successful and you've gotten the business to agree to the metrics and you are showing that they work, they'll do your visibility for you. But we've got to help them get there.
So to Judy's point, I think I would agree with that. And I think it's also what we see currently implemented in the different industries. So really the data science team who develop it, come up with it, they own the risk associated with that AI tool. They also need to execute the controls associated with it. And then you would have a typical, independent function, whether you call this a second line or whatever, or a review function, is kind of an oversight, which actually checks whether, the data science has done their job. And then you can make it even more sophisticated, and you have a third line potentially who looks at, whether the second line fulfilled the governance. They think the bigger piece is defining the governance, and the operating model is the first starting point, right? Agreeing on the ratio matrix, who owns what and how is it defined. I think that's critical. And I think this is a very, very core piece of foundational work that every enterprise should go through and say, look, going back to just even that definition, that should be clear, right? So if I say the model, developer generally, or tool developer, is not always the same as the model owner or model user, right? There is a difference, but in general, now going back to, a smaller enterprise and setup, generally they are intermingled to a large degree. And then you have that, kind of other party, which is the model, validator or model tester or whatever we want to call it. That's generally that oversight or control function, but is executing on the policy and the requirements associated with it. So that's how I currently see it most of the time. And it's also, and then goes back to, it is owned by the business, not by the, by the risk or the internal audit function in the enterprise. So that's what we currently see. And I also think that's the right way where it should be positioned.
Yeah, I'll just say the decision not to take a risk lines with the business leads. The metrics of the risk and stuff, that's the experts in the model risk side, right? They need to quantify it and say this is the risk, and then they can't accept it. The line of business has to accept it because they're responsible for if it rains and they didn't bring an umbrella, it's on them, right? But I feel like sort of like Jody said, I think me and my team is very responsible for and the metrics and the comprehensiveness. If they're making decisions based on metrics and the metrics are the problem, that's a big fail, right? As a modeler, we'll recommend things, right? We'll feel strongly, but we accept the risk, right? So I think we're deeply responsible, but we don't own it.
Yeah, the trend we've seen over and over again, it fits this same pattern with so many kind of comprehensive, visibility and monitoring in general, which is, of course, the business unit has to define the metrics. But as you there's, if you kind of almost think of like a treasury function, to be able to, there may be one group that's using a lot of GPUs for their particular model, and actually the return they're getting is not, it looks good in terms of their business, but when you zoom back and think of total cost of ownership, right, compared to a small data model that's driving outsized returns or really mitigating, brand risk or fraud, that this kind of apples to apples comparison across the business units means that the metrics should come with the model, but there should be some framework at the enterprise level to really do the full total cost of ownership across the models. And that allows for kind of continued evaluation, apples to apples, about where to put more data science and machine learning or other AI technique dollars at the business unit level. But again, I think that's a maturity issue. And where we've, this question of ownership, what we've seen is executive visibility is like the kind of one of the front edge, leading edge of a ModelOps capability that is becoming more, there's more need because of more organizations being more mature. But eventually, in the more mature organizations that we've been involved with, eventually it still moves into that kind of overall operating capability that you would have at, maybe the CIO level or something. So we tend to see center of excellence type drive initial adoption of that because they have the mandate and the relationships throughout the business units. They were involved in AI from day one, in kind of the wave one. And so they have that maybe kind of stepped back while AI matured in the business units and now leaning in again. But then kind of over time, it still kind of merges to kind of the central kind of ModelOps capability that ties into and continues to release the kind of freedom of innovation at the business unit level, which is, again, where the kind of excitement drives. So, that's kind of leads to my next question is just culturally, like, how has, data science, because of everything you've talked about, like the differences in business challenge, we've seen, I won't, it'd be interesting to hear your experiences. I think our experience, we've seen that data science is not quite as a collaborative activity as, say, software engineering, right? For a variety of reasons. But culturally, how have you seen your organizations struggle and or evolve when it comes to kind of a broader mandate of visibility on enterprise AI? And do you have any suggestions for people going through this journey based on your own experiences? Probably most importantly.
It's a hard question, Stu. I think, look, I'm much pickier about what problems I work on than I would have been 10 years ago. I want to know what it costs, right? Back to total cost of ownership. I want to know how much change management will take to get that ROI going. And I want to know that it's aligned to whatever the highest priority strategies of the company that I work for. If you have those three things, a lot of other things fall in place, in my opinion. I think there's still just, all that said, you can have all those things. The other piece, though, is, right, you do need that high collaboration with IT, right? In order to, especially with the models where we get to sort of mint the money, as I say, the automated ones where we're embedding them in a system or into a software product, there's, I think, a natural tension there because software engineering is not the same as MLOps. It is not the same as data science. We require different kind of maintenance, right? These aren't widgets. We don't set it and forget it. And we're super dependent on the quality of the data and other things that just are a little different. So unfortunately, I think as a result of that tension too, sometimes you see data science teams, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, being like, look at how much money our model makes. Well, it only really makes that also because the software engineering team did their job, right? And so I think we have to present those wins as collective wins, right? It's it's just as important, right? Our models by themselves are just a piece, are a good PowerPoint. And if we don't, and we need that collaboration, and we need, I think, that visibility, right? To say, we don't do this alone, we've got to embed it in the system. They are responsible for making sure that if that model breaks, that, they get the phone call if the code breaks, if the server goes down. I get the phone call, the one I fear more, which is model's running fine code-wise, but the result is not making the money or doing the thing we expect to do. But that is a collaboration, right? If that, I am dependent on that server going down, I'm dependent on that being sized right, I'm dependent on that being architected in a way that it can handle the volumes that we're seeing, that we minimize our GPU costs, whatever the right answers are. And so it's certainly healthier if we can try to present that story together as a win, and also kind of build that muscle memory for recognizing it as a joint solution and not like a cool AI thing.
Mario, you've seen a lot. How has the culture evolved around these issues?
I honestly, I truly believe we're still figuring it out. And I do believe there's different models that we tried, and I also don't think that there's one model that fits every enterprise. I think it's also dependent on your current organizational structure. And to use the buzzword culture, which is an important one from my perspective for every enterprise. And the question becomes pretty quickly, because you mentioned before as well, a little bit of center of excellence direction. And then now we've seen these different models where you have a center of excellence doing all the AI, and then everybody needs to tap in, but that's not the scalability that you want to achieve as soon as you spread out. How do you make sure that let's call it this model is then actually able to still keep the community informed what's going on? Because what you want is scale, but at the same time as well, people use it accordingly, efficiently across the different teams. What you don't want is that, you have 10 times the same model being developed because your institution is too large and you're not communicating. So what is that capability? And that goes back a little bit to, obviously, it is a policy and a governance question, but also a technology enablement, right? So a code repository, a code needs to be used once, and the model needs to sit there once. If I've developed that use case, how do I need to explain that use case? So a community of practice thinking, how do I make sure that everybody has access to it, people get aware of it, or the code is available to everybody for reuse? And how does that need to be done? And et cetera, et cetera. I think that's going back to the fact that I currently think that community of practice, same as we currently use tooling and statistical analysis, that's what we want to, AI being used for going forward. It's another tool, right? We have problem statements. And I think my biggest concern generally has been always, we have a fantastic algorithm and the fanciest NLP, so let's find the problem. That's the wrong direction from my perspective. I haven't seen this being very successful, but bringing this is the problem, this is what we're going to solve, and maybe a simple, even a simple statistical logistic regression helps to make this work before we go down a path of making the fancy NLP tool. But in some areas it is the right solution. But that's kind of, for me also in the business case evaluation, is it really needs to be drilled down. Is this really the most appropriate tooling and algorithm that we need to use for maintaining it over time in the input that we get? So it's that's what I currently see. So I still think I haven't seen the companies being very, very advanced in that kind of, cultural structure, and we still figure it out.
Great. Any last minutes about culture, Skip? I know you've been driving that a lot at Bank of New York Mellon.
No, that's I think the hardest part, and just sort of riffing on what Mario said. He mentioned community of practice. That's kind of where I see it going from center of excellence. The goal is to get forward deployed data scientists everywhere in every line of business. It's sort of like when the internet was new, there was a chief internet officer, right? And there was a small group that knew what HTML was. Now that's ridiculous. I think in the next few years you're going to see predictive analytics, prediction machines as a routine part of everything that's going on. And so the scalability and the general sort of governance is a big deal.
Yeah, and and we're just running out of time. And again, I just want to say thank you for sharing all the tremendous experience in terms of practice around enterprise AI and its evolution. I think you Jody said it's a hard question, especially this last one. And Mario said, we're still in this place. And I think it's no coincidence that we're at only the second annual ModelOps Summit. That, us too, we have seen this as a now rapidly evolving conversation compared to where it was a couple of years ago, but it is certainly an evolving conversation. We have found that being very clear that the models in their full context, getting the executive visibility to this model tends to accelerate the culture and the conversation, because it's something so concrete that everybody can look at and go, I see where my place is in this, or I see how this impacts the overall, I get the bigger picture. So it's super exciting. And, I invite all three of you to be very vocal in the kind of community around this topic going forward, because I think it's invaluable. Your experience as practitioners is invaluable to provide kind of an organizing principle to this community as more and more companies and organizations come behind you trying to figure it out. Your hard-won lessons are extremely valuable to the community. So thanks so much for sharing them.
Amazing.
Pleasure.
Stu, thank you so much for moderating a fantastic discussion there. Thank you to the panelists for such fantastic and candid answers as well. Now, we are going to be moving into our final session here today, or at least the final panel discussion before we head into that speaker meet and greet. And I actually have the pleasure of moderating this one. I've been looking forward to it all day long, sitting in the background watching these sessions, seeing those brilliant questions and comments, and please do keep those in. I'd love to be able to ask our next two panelists those burning questions of yours. And of course, we are talking all about AI orchestration, how to productionize your AI programs and protect them from multi-million-dollar operational and regulatory risks. A nice big chunky topic to end the day on. And I am hoping I'm going to be joined by both Endri and Paul. If you would like to pop your cameras on, I think the best place for us to start here today is a quick introduction. So Endri, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name is Endri Mani. I head the data science platform team at RBC Capital Markets. Basically, our team helps other internal data scientists within RBC to industrialize and scale their models and productionalize their models.
Thank you so much for being here today, Andrew. And Paul, if you wouldn't mind doing the same.
Sure. Paul Janis. I lead the MLOps team here at New York Life, essentially taking a model from, leading it through all the various phases of the life cycle and ensuring that they get productionized.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. And my name is Catherine, and I am the head of digital content here at Corinium. And one of those wonderful pieces of content that the team have been working on tirelessly is actually available on the platform here now as part of the ModelOps report. So do make sure you have downloaded that one to read later on if you haven't done already. So please dive in. But I think the best place for us all to start, and I'm going to channel my inner toddler and ask kind of the why questions to begin with, which is, what's driving the need for orchestrating any aspect of an enterprise AI journey across different BU, data science and machine learning tools? Why are we at the place we are at? Paul, I'll come to you first for that one, if you don't mind.
Sure. So really, there's a real big need to be able to orchestrate. One, it helps ensure our production processes are reliable. We want them to be efficient, automatable, and really we want them to scale. Like that's really a key aspect. Once you start to scale models, like if you just have a couple models in production, it's not a big deal, but you get 10, 15, 20, you really start to see your inefficiencies, and that's key to identify those, and really that orchestration really helps to really get you through that.
I love that you've mentioned scale. I mean, it's such a big topic at the moment, and I think it's on everyone's minds. And that's what the business is thinking as well, right? That's their aim, is they want to be able to scale it. So we in the data functions need to be thinking exactly the same way. How can we make this bigger across the entire enterprise, or even into new functions as well? Thank you, Paul. Andrew, how about yourself? What's driving the need for you?
Yeah, I would second pretty much everything that Paul just said. Maybe focus a little bit more on scale and sort of unlocking or maybe maximizing the value of your models. At the end of the day, you know, every business sees some value, and that's why they put their investment in. And you want to be able, as an organization, to fully understand what is the cost it'll take you to operationalize the model, scale it out, and you know, obviously, like, what value you'll get out of it. So having, I would say, a framework where this is extremely clear for management, I think that is a huge key to success, and that's why orchestration is needed.
I love this. We're playing my favorite word, bingo, at the moment with scaling and then value there, Andrew. I mean, in terms of that business focus, having the value just transparent, because we can end up in the weeds, right, where we're just producing things for the sake of it, and actually we're not maybe tying it back to that business value of understanding that KPI and the direction we need to be heading in for sure. Now, it's been mentioned a lot here today that there's obviously a lot of monitoring involved when it comes to production models. When they're out in the world, we need to be keeping an eye on them. So how do you orchestrate and coordinate an operational response when thresholds are crossed? I'll go to Andrew. I'll go to you first.
So when it comes to monitoring, I tried to sort of split it into two types of monitoring. One would be sort of more of the technical or sort of standard type of monitoring to kind of see how many requests your modeler is getting, more on the, and you know, like whether it's utilizing the resources you're allocating, more on the sort of like hardware side or technical side. And then the other side of monitoring is, you know, is it performing? Is it valuable? And is it worth it at the end of the day? And it kind of depends, I guess. And in my mind, these are two separate functions. And you know, on the first hand, you need sort of more technical involvement. On the second piece, you might want more involvement from your data scientists, from your business, to kind of understand whether that monitoring, you know, whether your model is producing the output that you need, and you know, be able to kind of come up with I would say triggers to solve any problems that might come up. Obviously, you want to automate as much as possible. But at the end of the day, it really depends on the use case, depends on the model itself, and kind of, you know, going back to what Jody was talking about on the previous panel. For example, like data drift and some type of these, or drift in general, some of these sort of out of the box monitoring tools don't necessarily fit every single example. So you have to work very closely with your business to build the right tests and the right sort of like live monitoring for your model, and not everything will kind of work for across all models.
I love that you distinguish it into two camps there, and then, as you say, not having that cookie cutter approach, or at least trying to do that. So many, well, all organizations are so unique anyway, and then, as you say, the use cases of value, etc., is going to be so unique. So trying to, as you say, have those out of the box solutions may not always be the best method, but of course at least provide a base to jump from. Paul, how about yourself when it comes to that consistent monitoring of production models?
Yeah, I agree. And you know, our first few models, you know, unfortunately, monitoring was sort of the last minute item, or the afterthought. We didn't have it built in from the beginning, or at least what we thought we had built in from the beginning wasn't there. So having a framework is key to monitoring, and you know, ensuring that it's set up to be, you know, continuously monitoring, you know, all of your features and your data, you know, things like data drift, etc. I get it; it's key and it's important. But there's, you know, we sometimes overlook the simple things, right? You know, and sometimes, you know, we'll try to apply all these really tough statistical measures on the model, and in the end, you know, like you just need some kind of simple monitoring as well. But ground truth data is really key to ensuring that it's running correctly. And you know, just overall, like, you know, you want to be able to tie this into a system that is, you know, from an orchestration standpoint, right? It's great to have monitoring, but if it's sending an email out or something like that, it's not sending out a correct alert to the right people at the right time. It's not worth it. So you definitely want to ensure that you've orchestrated it so that you do have that key deliverable in place.
Absolutely amazing. Now we already have some questions coming in here. So Aaron has sent in how to keep the models up to date with relevant data, time to time, and still keep operations running. Andrew, would you like to have a stab at that one?
Can you please repeat the question one more time, Catherine?
How to keep models up to date with relevant data, time to time, and still keep the operations running.
Okay, so that's a great question, and I think that's very very important, and that's something that we've sort of like solved internally at RBC. It depends, right? Not all models will make use of that refresh data, and you might want to automate that process. But when it comes to financial markets, for example, if you're building models that are trying to be predictive in nature, obviously you want to have the latest data available to your model. So it goes back to AI orchestration, right? At the end of the day, you want to automate as much as possible in your pipelines, and you kind of start realizing that the model itself is probably like 10% of your entire work, and the rest of the work goes into the pipeline. So if you build the pipeline correctly in an automated way, so that every time there's new observed data points, you bring them in, and you have a full pipeline of kind of removing what you don't need, cleaning the data, preparing it for your model, training, then retraining in parallel while you have a model that's already in production. So we've done this internally, like at RBC. So that's kind of how most of our models work. It's extremely important, I think, because you want to be able to adapt to changing data structures and changing environments. But it won't work for all models, right? It depends on your use case, I guess.
Amazing. Paul, did you want to add some flavor to that from your experience?
Sure, like having your pipelines in place is and monitored is great, and but things are going to happen. Data types will get changed on source systems unexpectedly. Seeing quite a few different scenarios. Data will be missing. Data will be late. You just have to kind of prepare for them and have that capability to recover or detect it, right? Before it gets to it. You don't want your end users to find out the problem, right? Or get a call and say, this thing is completely wrong, right? Either your monitoring picks it up, or you have a process in place through orchestration that catches it. So
100%. Now, I've loved how engaged everyone is with these questions. It certainly makes my job easier here. And Andrew, we did have one come in for you saying, Andrew, monitoring value requires defining it first, and it is not a single dimensional concept, it's multi-dimensional. Financial, my screen's moved here, financial, internal, customer, and other. If a model helps you increase top line revenue but negatively impacts net promoter score and or gross margin, do you calculate the net value, and if so, based on what criteria?
So that's a great question, and kind of complicated, I guess. In my opinion, the best, success will always come in any data science project. Success will come if you work very closely with the business, and maybe not only work closely with it, but like bring them into the whole journey. And when you do that, just like as a data scientist, you're trying to answer a question, trying to optimize, maybe minimize some error, or sort of like maximize some gaining function, something like that. One of the questions that, in my eyes needs to be answered is, we need to maximize for value. And how we define what the value is very important, and that's what you need to do with your business partners. If the value is not clear, because I come from a physics background. Like I've worked in research labs quite a lot. Research can go out of hand and pretty expensive very quickly. So you want to be able to kind of understand how much you're putting into it and what you can possibly get out. So it's somewhat of a optimization game as well, right? You want to define your value as much as you can, and then be able to price your models accordingly. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it will, but we do have the speaker meet greet next, so we can always check in there and make sure if we want to go deeper. But actually, on the topic of diving deeper, we did have a follow-up question saying, also to the same point, cleaning the junk data to the relevant operations context is very important. How does this happen with MLOps? Paul, I wondered if you would like to answer that follow-up.
Sure, like, having, good ETL processes in place. Particularly on batch type models, like you can do a lot of that, upfront legwork and, clean your data. Like, you're going to get bad data. Real-time models a little bit harder. You're going to, have to kind of build wrappers around it to test and detect, like for that. Again, not that hard, but it's something you're going to have to, build into your process and build it in from the beginning, and from your orchestration, like have that aligned correctly, so that imagine how many credit cards are swiped in the last 10 minutes that we've been on the call, right? So can you imagine if, like, one bad credit card transaction would cause like Visa to stop processing their data, right? So yeah, you have to have ways to work around it, reject it, and move on. So.
Amazing, wonderful. Thank you for those questions, and do keep them coming in. Now, many data science development platforms offer MLOps features to automate AI model operations. But why do you think these aren't sufficient enough for AI orchestration? Andrew, I'll come to you first for that one.
I guess at the risk of maybe sounding like a broken record, when I think of sort of AI and machine learning applications themselves, I like the analogy of having like a young child that is very, very good at math, but the only thing that they're good at is just math, and that's kind of it. So if you ask the child, for example, tell me what the price of Apple is going to be, a month from now, they don't really know the dynamics of the market, but they could, do math like very well. So I use this analogy because it goes back to having these solutions which will span everything. There won't be one model or one platform that will span across everyone and solve everything. Machine learning solves very, very, very specific questions. And if you don't ask the question specifically, you're going to very likely waste your investment. So because of that, it's hard to find good orchestration platforms that will work for your business and maybe for your organization altogether. So that's like, there are, high level tools that you need, that everybody needs, when it comes to infrastructure and things like that. But then you get into some very, very specific solutions that every organization kind of does, differently. That's why I think there's no one unique winner, I guess, in this game.
I love that analogy. It's such a great one. So easy for everyone to understand as well. Thank you so much, Andrew. Paul, what about yourself? A bit of thought on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Not all platforms, are going to necessarily have all the capabilities, for us to leverage, right? And we want to be able to scale. Again, I'll go back to the ability to scale. But I look at our environment here at New York Life. It's kind of a hybrid environment. We have a good mix of legacy type applications and good mix of recent applications. Being able to integrate with all those, you're not going to have one out of the box solution for that. So having a partner is key, though, I think. But I don't know that you're going to have there's no silver bullet, right? You're going to have to, work within your own organization to find the best fit. Be able to identify those issues, whether they're environmental, whether they're, go back to the data type problems, right? Those aren't going away. And again, how do you get those economies of scale, across the application?
Absolutely wonderful. Now, no matter what I'm hosting or content creating, whatever it is, there always tends to be a question around timing, kind of when is the right time? So whether that's data governance or employing certain different things. I wanted to ask you both that same question in this context as well. When is the right time to implement an AI orchestration? Where are you positioning that? How many models in production, etc.? What's the sort of thing that you're looking for as a moment in time to say, yeah, this is the kind of sweet spot for you? Paul, I'll go to you first for that one.
Sure, I think the earlier the better. The adoption of orchestration is really key to getting back to scale, right? Again, once you start to operate at scale, you're going to see your inefficiencies. And in today's world, we're really expected to interact with real production systems. Our business units, they want us to be able to productionize this code. It's not just insights. It's not just sitting on a shelf. It's not just going to run once a month, once a quarter. The real value is doing that, and adopting that orchestration is key, and it adds value. And we're not just dropping some code out there and just hoping that it works. And we really wanted to solve the problem, but more importantly, I believe on the last session, they're not worried about the code failing. They're worried about getting a call that hey, the code's working, but it's doing the wrong thing, right? So having a healthy orchestration is key to all that.
Love that. So as soon as possible. Andrew, what's your answer to that question? I'm assuming it's going to be something similar.
Yeah, it's pretty much kind of the same. I would say as soon as possible. The earlier you can start with that, the better it will be, because even if you only have plans for maybe one model, very likely you're going to iterate on that model multiple times. So you want to have orchestration so that you make iteration much, much faster. So even if you just have one model, I think you got to think about AI orchestration.
Absolutely fantastic. So we've had another audience question come in here asking, what's your take on self-built ML ops / orchestration platforms versus market buy? They've given an example of Vertex AI, Google's product. What are the parameters to consider to make such critical decisions? Great question. Andrew, I'll come to you first.
So I would say it's pretty difficult to build it yourself because there's so many things you have to think about. Again, obviously it depends on the company, depends on the use case, depends on a lot of things. It is difficult to build it by yourself. My sort of feel is that it's better to kind of build sort of some of the heavier pieces where you can make use of, for example, like on Vertex AI, their notebook infrastructure is pretty good. Their orchestration is also pretty good. But at the end of the day, kind of big, it depends, right? So you might have requirements where your data cannot sit on the cloud. You have to sit on private cloud. So you have to think and weigh your options depending on your use case. And then maybe build accordingly, some of the smaller tools that you will need that are very specific for your business. I guess likely you'll need to build those yourself.
Amazing. Paul, how about yourself?
Yeah, second what Andrea said, having, that kind of you don't want to go in it with blinders on, right? So you want to ensure what's in your environment. Does this fit your environment? Does it fit your use cases? Again, there is no silver bullet in this, right? Lots of different vendors are going to have different products, and what fits best. And if you have a legacy type environment where you're going to have data on-prem, or being able to go all in on the cloud, it would be great. If we were starting our companies in 2022, nobody would probably build anything in a data center, but you would just adopt a cloud first mentality from the beginning. But I think you kind of have to see what fits. And work with your partners as well. I'd say this is where it's key, partnering not just as a business unit, but partnering with folks in technology. Does it work in their perspective? Do you have the support? Do you have the skill sets? Lots of things to consider.
Absolutely amazing. So we've had another, gosh, the questions just keep coming. I'm loving it, everyone. I'm absolutely loving it. So we've had another question come in here saying, while the platform providers are still consolidating functionality and we have highly hybridized systems, what are your recommendations for reducing costs of maintenance of internally built components and connections? Paul, I'll come to you first for that one.
Yeah, it's hard to get away, from that. If you can buy versus build, I'd recommend that. But you're still gonna have to build some things, and building them in a modular type fashion and ensuring that, let's not develop a bunch of Python code when your technology partners, support folks don't even know Python and they can't support it. So adopting what the organization already uses will definitely be key to success here.
Amazing. Andrew, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say it's a somewhat of a difficult problem, right? But I'll kind of second what Paul was saying about modularizing and sort of breaking down into components as much as you can. Maybe another sort of like a very broad suggestion would be to containerize, if possible, your applications, because this way you can kind of lift and shift. And at least you get rid of the sort of like the or you abstract the underlying infrastructure. So if you're building components internally, probably want to containerize them.
Amazing. I've got the team in the ear telling me that I've got about 5 minutes left before I need to wrap up, just because they know I'll overrun because I'm loving it so much. And they've just posted in the report link in the chat as well. So do be sure to click on that one before this Zoom closes, before we head over to the next one. But the last one I want to ask is a difficult question, because I know it's going to be very particular to your own organizations. And as we've already mentioned, we really shouldn't be employing a cookie cutter approach to this by any stretch. And it's going to be unique. But with all of that said, when it comes to your own organizations, which part of the organization really needs to be owning the AI orchestration? Is it AI, IT, CIO, risk, analytics? Where is that sitting, and someone needs to own it, right? So who's that going to be? Paul, I'll come to you.
Sure. So, it's a good question. The ownership, I think it depends where you are in your journey. If you're relatively new and you're developing, you might have to own this. Like in our case, we're kind of owning a lot of this. We have partnered with our technology teams. I feel the ownership of orchestration, though, does lie with technology, with dotted lines into the business units, to ensure that the models are certainly, monitored. There's guardrails on them. But I don't think that, I think it's a combined ownership, between the technology and the business units that have them. It's probably the best way to put that.
Thank you so much. Andrew, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'll just I completely agree with Paul. And just kind of add that the ownership kind of needs to be split, where orchestration piece likely to be owned by technology, and models themselves obviously need to be owned by the specific businesses. I think when businesses which obviously partner with technology, but when businesses own those models, then it becomes clear in a way, because then they can attach value to it. They can analyze much better than what a technology team could do.
Absolutely wonderful. Now, unfortunately, we have run out of time for this session, but do not worry, we'll be heading over to the speaker meet and greet session in a moment. But just before I send out the closing remarks, Andrew, Paul, thank you so much for joining me. Really, really insightful session to end this wonderful event on. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, and I know there are several that the team are pulling across for the next Zoom room, then please do join that, because we will be diving a little bit deeper into those questions, and just a chance to meet our speakers face to face, as you would at a usual event. So all you're going to need to do is open up the chat. Our team will be posting it directly in there, or you can go back to the platform and you'll be able to find the link as well. But of course, that leaves me a chance to say a huge big thank you to everyone who has joined today. I really hope you found value in it. And of course, a huge big thank you to our speakers, our moderators, and of course the team behind the scenes who you don't get to see, who've been working tirelessly, Tanya, Eve, Delia, and Linda. Of course, well done on all of your hard work today to make this happen. Now, we have been receiving questions about on demand. Yes, these sessions will be on demand, so you will be able to catch up in the coming days, and it will be available for around 30 days, so you can come back and rewatch and write your notes. And of course, if your colleagues didn't get a chance to join us today, but they do still want to watch it, they can register to watch that on-demand content as well. And as a final note, before we head over to the speaker meet and greet session, download that report. It's really, really worth reading, and of course can be used internally yourselves as getting those stakeholders and executives brought into this mission. But for now, I will see you over in the next Zoom room. Thank you so much.